We're live.
Okay, I think we're ready to get started. We've got a big crowd here today, clearly. I think we've got several folks joining us virtually this afternoon, so we'll go ahead and get started. It looks like we don't have any proclamations, but we've got our first presentation regarding the Uptown Master Plan update. And Laura from RDG Planning and Design.
Yes, I just wanted to introduce Laura. She's been working with us for probably about 6 months now as we've completed the Uptown Master Plan update. And this is really taking the variety and various project and planning documents that we've had put together over the last few years, going back to about 2010, if not even earlier than that, and kind of putting them into a document that's a little updated. And we drew on a lot of the public participation throughout those planning documents to really bring together a document that's up to date and really is reflective of how we see the community growing in the Uptown, and really puts all those pieces together. Laura and RDG have been great to work with, and I think the council's received the document, had a chance to review it. It's very graphic. We're hoping that it's very user-friendly for the public, for the Uptown folks, and it's just exciting to see this document come together. For those that work in real estate, having a plan that reflects actually what's built is very refreshing, because there's a lot of explanation that has to happen when your planning documents don't really match what's sitting out there. So it's been a good refresh, and we're excited about what it's projecting into the future. So I asked Laura just to kind of give us a little briefing on it. And obviously, if there's questions, we can try and tag team and answer to that. But with that, I just introduced Laura. She's been fantastic and a great advocate for what we've been doing, and just let her take it away from here.
Thank you, Tom. Can you all hear me all right?
We sure can.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for your time today. Again, my name is Laura Kessel. I am a planner and landscape architect at RDG Planning and Design in Des Moines. And since you do have a copy of the plan, the purpose today is to provide a high-level overview of the plan and offer you that opportunity to ask questions at the end. Next slide, please. So before I go too much further, though, I do want to share that it really has been an incredible pleasure to work with your community and your staff on this effort. I don't say that ingenuinely. You all have a wonderful thing happening in your community, and it's in large part thanks to the efforts of many of you to make this a great place to live and work. So with this particular effort, we started back in April of 2020. We are wrapping it up here this month with you all. And as Tom shared, it really does draw on the public engagement efforts from the previous plans. We did not want to put the citizens of your community through a lot of planning fatigue and ask them the same questions they'd been asked before. So we combed through the 15 prior planning efforts that touch on or focus on Uptown from 2009 to 2020, and really drew out that feedback from those plans. As Tom mentioned, it builds upon the previous efforts, so it's not trying to reinvent the wheel in some of those areas that have already been planned, but it really wants to set out some near-term and some midterm improvements that you all can act on in the upcoming few years here, as well as think about some of those larger aspirational things that you want to keep on your radar going down the road. Overall, though, the primary purpose is to build on the good momentum that you have started in Uptown to make this a regional destination that is reflective of Marion and some of the unique characteristics of your community and of Uptown in particular. The plan content is divided into several sections. I'll go through those in a little bit here as we move forward. But I do also want to mention, I guess, one other thing in relationship to this effort. This plan was done concurrently with the 7th Avenue Street and Streetscape design work in coordination with the rest of our RDG team on that effort, as well as Anderson Bogert. So it really was knitting together those two efforts to make sure that they were talking to each other, since they're influential to each other. Next slide, please. So the guidance for these planning efforts, as well as the 7th Avenue Street and Streetscape projects, was provided by two different groups, a technical committee and a steering committee. Several of you served on our steering committee, so we thank you for helping with that effort. And the groups were designed to represent kind of a broad cross-section of representatives from Uptown Marion, business owners, residents, elected officials, Uptown Marion, Marion Chamber of Commerce. So really thankful for the guidance that everyone was able to provide and the good ideas that came out of that as well. Next slide, please. So the overall scope of the effort, as Tom said, it's really about knitting together the previous plans and filling the gaps. But in terms of a geographic scope, we focus primarily on that area that you see in that dark blue rectangle, which is bounded on the north by 8th Avenue, on the south by 5th Avenue, on the west by the 7th Street roundabout, and on the east largely by the 15th Street roundabout. And then you can also see that lighter shade of blue just reflecting that 7th Avenue Street and Streetscape first phase effort as well. Next slide. And then to give you a small preview of the document, an overview of the document, this is just the table of contents slide, and the document's divided into 5 primary chapters, focusing really in the first chapter on the why and some of the background of the information. So an overall overview and process purpose of the plan, a snapshot of existing conditions in chapter 2, and then 2 chapters focusing on recommendations, first on the public realm side of things, and then secondly on the private realm opportunities and potential vision for a few areas. And then finally summarizing implementation opportunities for the city. Next slide, please. You will find in the document a summary of that community feedback from the previous planning efforts. Again, we really looked at that feedback very closely. Hundreds and hundreds of citizens and business owners have weighed in on what they want to see and what they want to continue to see happen in the Uptown area. So we really wanted to take that very seriously in order to move this plan forward in the right direction. And that was very influential to the development of guiding principles. Next slide, please. So the guiding principles were one of the most critical elements of the master plan. And I know this is all really little on the screen. The intent is to just kind of touch on the highlights here. But what the guiding principles do for the plan and for the community moving forward is distill down a lot of that good feedback from previous efforts into touchstones for decision making moving forward. And it's divided into 4 broad categories. Those categories include the character of the district. So when we think about the character of the district, we want to think about how can intentional public investments in the public realm continue to support the private uses. How can we celebrate that unique character of Marion while also balancing history, creativity in the way that we express the district. From a programming standpoint, asking ourselves what does and what should happen here more. And a large part of that is thinking about intergenerational activities for both everyday things such as outdoor dining, but also special events and that regional destination category that people are interested in. And what might make someone stay a little bit longer, walk a block further, and bring family and friends back to the district. From a redevelopment perspective, thinking about how we can continue to promote Uptown as a walkable district in keeping with the original character of Uptown. And then from an infrastructure perspective, thinking about the systems that need to support the activities of Uptown, whether that be transportation, lighting, utilities. So all of these systems play a role in that bigger picture vision of Uptown. Next slide. So the next chapter looks at existing conditions. And in terms of existing conditions, really Uptown largely in the last 10 to 20 years has been defined by a very intentional positive direction and momentum. And you can really see that in the condition of Uptown today. So there's a lot of things to celebrate here. And feedback from the community also represents that positive direction. There were a few areas of Uptown that could use improvement, as indicated by community feedback, as well as our observations in the planning efforts. Those include things such as the first impressions of Uptown, especially as you're coming in from the east or the west. The need to create a little more diversity in gathering spaces for community events and activities, and also just some general improvements to walkability, especially as it relates to the crossing of some of the higher traffic corridors like 7th Avenue. Next slide. So then the next chapter talks about recommendations. And as I mentioned, we're breaking recommendations down into a public realm chapter and a private realm chapter. And this first slide just represents a few of the categories of public realm recommendations. So one of the things is we wanted to summarize a recommendation to continue some of the previous plan recommendations, that we don't reiterate, we don't redraw some of those items, but just refer back to those efforts that have already been planned. Also recommendations as it relates to circulation. So from a circulation perspective, there are some modest suggestions for improvements to vehicular circulation in the longer term phase of development. And then some more detailed recommendations as it relates to bicycle and pedestrian network movement through the district. And then finally, we did also conduct a very high level parking study or parking observations in Uptown District, but because of COVID, we can't do a full parking study at this time because any good parking study has to be founded in really good data. Right now, if we did inventory of parking, it would be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and the behaviors of drivers and parkers in the district. So the plan does recommend a fuller parking study to be completed at a later date. Next slide. The plan also does make recommendations about district identity improvements. And these type of improvements include items such as gateways, vertical monuments, and opportunities for art. It takes into account, we already have some great things happening with the bridge to the west of Uptown, but also then looking closer into the district, how do we think about this place as a way to improve the overall perception of Uptown as a multi-block district? You really have an interesting district that is not just the stretch from 10th to 12th on 7th Avenue and up to 8th Avenue. You really do have this multi-block experience. And how do we make sure that users are seeing that as well, or first-time visitors, second-time visitors realize that walking one block further is worth the walk, staying a little bit longer is worth it. And by creating some of these experiences, monuments, art opportunities, that really encourages that multi-block experience. Next slide. So in a similar way, the goal to enhance Uptown as a destination, and especially a cultural and entertainment destination, is supported through recommendations to expand the Artway. It's a really successful first phase of the Artway, so the plan makes recommendations for future expansions of that, as well as a trio of plaza spaces. These spaces were drawn heavily from a programming standpoint on some of the feedback and ideas from previous planning efforts, and really intended to provide opportunities for year-round engagement for people of all ages. Next slide. And then from a private realm perspective, the plan makes recommendations about the opportunities to continue to identify appropriate infill and future redevelopment opportunities, and then dove specifically into a few blocks that the city asked us to look at and study some illustrative vision opportunities for the block directly north of City Hall, as well as the blocks surrounding the 15th Street roundabout. So the intent of these exercises is not to say this is what development shall be and what shall happen here, but to paint a picture for how that area could develop into the future, and provide some of that inspiration for that opportunity moving forward. Next slide. And finally, the last chapter of the document summarizes all of these elements from a phasing perspective and from a cost estimation perspective, phasing it from a kind of near-term or short-term, mid-term, and long-term perspective. The intent from city staff is that this will be updated on an annual basis. We know that variables change, priorities change from year to year. So that opportunity for the city to take a fresh look at this based on new variables, new considerations is an important element to the city. But overall, this really is intended to be a plan that can help you all think from a holistic perspective about all of the great things and efforts that you've done in the past. Take a look at a few areas with fresh eyes and package it together in a way that you can move forward to continue to make Uptown an incredible district for your community. So with that, the final slide, if you can advance one more, is just opportunity to turn it back to you for your questions. Again, I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Tom, for getting us started. Appreciate that. So we've got a couple of us here and a couple virtuals. Maybe you have questions for Laura. Steve, I see that you've unmuted yourself. Do you have questions?
Yeah, just from a high level. So Laura, is this plan at this point pretty well complete? I know there's more details related to the streetscape still to be finalized, but from a high level standpoint, is what you're presenting us here, is this master plan complete?
Yes,
Okay.
It is intended to be the final version of the document.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? Grant.
Yes, Laura, first off, I had a chance to scan through the document as it's posted on our city website, and I want to just thank you and your firm for the comprehensive build out of this information. One question, and I think I could answer it when I study it in more detail, but the multiple phases from start to finish, approximately how long, what time span does that encompass?
That is a good question. There are a few elements that are certainly in the longer term phase. Let me just pull up my phasing diagram here. So for example, some of the longer term elements are certainly in the 2027 plus range. So getting out past a 6-year time window. Others may be even longer term than that. So there are areas of the Artway, for example, that we see as potential expansion areas, but not items that we see as imminent priorities, but something for the city to kind of keep their eye on. And those are shown kind of in the long term, but also to be determined. So again, that idea that the city would revisit the priorities on an annual basis is an important aspect.
Also, part of the consideration was the availability of funding. The plan is intended to be responsive, looking at what we have right now in CIP. We broke those phases down into 3, shorter term and a longer, kind of mid-range and a longer term phase of the plan.
Thank you.
Do you have something to add, Tom?
I was just going to also point out that there's some things that are identified to the plan that have been in past plans as well, particularly the routing of 11th Street over 11th Street routing over to 10th, and it just kind of paints a picture of, we don't want something like that to come out, and it may be 10 years or 15 years, but just so that kind of continues as something that's out there. So it does paint that longer term picture of some of the broader things that may or may not occur until we have an absolute necessity for it. So future plans and studies would kind of identify when those things happen, but it kind of keeps them top of mind and in a document that's, when like when the corridor plan was first brought forward, that came out of nowhere because it was a brand new concept when we bought the railroad right away. In this instance, I do see that being a pretty big piece at some point into the future for Marion. I don't know when, but we certainly don't want that to blindside the community like it was never thought about before. So there are some pieces of the plan that illustrate that as well.
Sure. Did you spin that? All right. Well, thanks again. It's exciting. It, you know, reminds us of that we need to play the long game, not the short game for this one, right? So thanks again, Laura. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you all. I look forward to a day I can come hang out with you all in the Artway, share a nice cold drink or a meal. So looking forward to that day. So good work to you all. It's been a pleasure.
We are looking forward to that as well. So thank you.
All right, take care.
Okay, and the other presentations are on Thursday, is that right? Yep, okay. All right, so on to the consent agenda. I don't see anything marked until E4. Any questions before we get to E4? Okay, I don't see anything, so it looks like engineering, E4. Mike, you're up. Remember the conversation earlier, right?
This will be very quick. On the PowerPoint slide, I just have an exhibit to show you where English Glen 5th edition is. So this is north of 29th Avenue. Just to give you a kind of context, because not everybody knows where every subdivision is. And so we're just accepting these public improvements.
Okay. Any questions? Looks like we've got a quiet group for this one, so you're good. All right. So we don't have anything until the regular agenda, A3. Are there any questions between engineering, E4, all the way? I think we've got 2 or 3 pages here. So it looks like, maybe I was trying to skip one. Sorry, A1, right? Administrative services, public hearing on the proposed development agreement with What Do You Want, Inc. So who is going to take that for us today?
Me, Your Honor.
Thanks, Amal.
So on Thursday, we're going to have public hearing on a proposed development agreement with What Do You Want. The city has an MOU with the developer. This is related to tax incentive associated with the development of the 1204 7th Avenue lot, developing that into a mixed-use building with commercial space on first floor and residential on second floor. Council may recall that this site was challenging. The incentive was to help with the funding related to the site preparation. This action is consistent with the Urban Renewal Area Purpose Statement, and it's consistent with the Central Corridor plan and expected to contribute to the Uptown vitality. The incentive is in the form of 75% tax rebate for 7 years and capped at 50,000.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, discussion? Okay, so we will move on to, you want to take it? A3, so let me see, negotiate contract regarding general obligation, corporate purpose and refunding loan agreement and to borrow money thereunder in a principal amount not to exceed 25 million. Is that you as well, Amal?
Yes.
Okay.
This is regarding the ratio interim financing. On December 10th, we posted an RFP requesting proposals for a line of credit or similar facility, we invited all the financial institutions we have on our distribution list. Later, on the list, we have total 17 financial institution. Later, we heard from 2 additional institutions, and out of total 19 invited to participate, we received 2 proposals, one from US Bank and another one from Wells Fargo. We reviewed those proposals with our legal and bonding counsel. We looked at pricing, we looked at terms, and we are all in agreement that Wells Fargo offer is the way to go. Today we're going to be, or Thursday, we are seeking council direction to negotiate an agreement with them.
Okay, any questions? Discussion? All right, quiet group again. Would you like to take over now, Mayor?
Next item that's marked for discussion is C1 under public safety.
Hi, Council. This is Jason.
Hey, Jason.
This is essentially a new exhaust removal system for our apparatus that are going to be housed at the new station. For those of you who've taken tours of the departments or the stations, we have the Plimo vent system with the yellow hoses that hang from the ceilings, require an air compressor to pressurize the cuffs with a release system and such. This is a newer technology system that removes the carbon monoxide and exhaust fumes from the apparatus, hence preventing the installation of hanging hoses, not necessarily trip hazards, but they are cumbersome and get in the way when moving around the apparatus. And that's what this is for, is to equip the 4 apparatus that will be housed there permanently, and a 5th apparatus, which allows us to get a discount on a price per unit discount. And that would be placed on our reserve engine. So when our engine at station, the new headquarters station, is in for maintenance repairs as such, the backup apparatus would have that installed as well.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, Jason, Grant here. I see the quotation that you had received was for a quantity of 12. Is it your intent at some future date to seek approval for additional units to be installed?
Yeah, that's a good question, Grant. We have our Plimo vent systems in the equipment reserve budget and have been on there as replacements. Is one of those fail, it would be our intent to, or if it gets to be a high maintenance cost, our intent would be to no longer service that equipment and have our whole fleet equipped with this system.
Okay, good. So you were just trying to lock down a price should that be necessary?
Yes. I do have a updated quote for just the 5 that I can provide for council, but the per unit cost is the same.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to engineering. Item E1 is marked. We have Mike here.
Yes, Your Honor. So this is the project calendar for the 2021 HMA resurfacing project. So the streets are in red there. And then on the next slide, we actually have them listed. So some of that, if you recall, last year we took a portion of 10th Avenue away from that project because of the 29th Avenue and some of the Grand Avenue work. And so we're fixing the areas of 10th Avenue that were removed as part of that project. This does have a completion date of September 3rd, liquidated damages of $300 per calendar day, and an estimate of $1 million.
So as it says 24th Street, McGowan to,
Must have got cut off. It's in the memo correctly.
to look for it, okay. Okay, questions on this item?
Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
So, Mike, are these streets still connected or still selected from a prior list, or are these streets now being selected by this new, was it HSA study?
So using the PCI numbers,
PCI, thank you.
management, it is using that system. I know we haven't presented that to the
Okay.
city council yet. That's going to be likely at the next council meeting in February, the next set of them. There were some streets that were on the PCI list that actually were ranked higher to do. However, because of the multiple projects we do have to leave some transportation modes in the city. So some of them we purposely did not do this year because of some of the other streets that we're closing, just so you can still get around.
All right, thanks.
Okay, and that seems to be pretty well in line with our annual amount that we spend on.
Yep, and the presentation that we give likely at the next set of council meetings, we'll discuss that dollar amount as well and how we move forward with that.
Okay, other questions? All right, E2.
So this is the project calendar for our annual sidewalk ramp project. So this typically follows our HMA project or those areas in which we've been notified that there are issues with our sidewalk ramps. So this is one of our unfunded mandates where we have to make the ramps ADA. And if you can go to the next slide. So it has an estimate of 130,000, late start date of August 2nd, 30 working days, and $300 per day in liquidated damages.
Okay, questions? All right, E3.
And E3 is our project calendar for phase 4 of the CMAR project. So this will leave off from where the existing CMAR over Indian Creek is. We'll build the new bridge over Marion Boulevard, and it will connect down to the just south of the Country Kitchen at the 7th and 7th roundabout. One thing to note is the decorative pillars will not be installed as part of this project. That will be a separate project at a later date. The railings that you see there, though, will be installed as part of the project, but it's just the pillars. So the foundations for the pillars will be installed, but they will be put in at a later date. And if we can go to the next slide. So for this one, it does get let through the DOT, through the BidX program. The engineer's estimate is just shy of $2 million. Has a late start date of 6/7 of 21 with 95 working days, $1,000 per day in liquidated damages. This is an 80-20 split, so the CMPO is paying for 80% of it. The city is paying for 20%. In the CIP, we did add some construction, inspection, and administration because of our staff loads, because of all the projects that we have going on this year. That's about $130,000 to do that with external staff. Because this is a bridge and a specialized project, we're suggesting going that direction rather than have our staff just be the go-between with those questions, because a lot of it's structural related. We don't have a structural engineer on staff.
Okay, questions on this item? Mike, so back to the decorative elements of the bridge.
You can go back a slide.
So what's the projected timeline for that being, I mean, is it?
Yeah, so we have to wait till the bridge is done and completed unless Kesha's got a different authorization, and that could take a couple of years to get that by the time you go through the FHWA process of getting it closed out. So it does take some time that those pillars may not be there. So it might be a little more plain for that period of time, but in order to get it constructed, that's the process that we have to go through.
Okay, so the railing will be there, but not the decorative elements on it.
The railing, as you see it there, I understand, will be part of the project.
Oh, what's
It's
the
just two
decorative
pillars
elements on the
that won't be
railing,
there.
but just not the pillars?
Correct.
Okay. And that had to happen that way because of the way the funding works?
Yeah.
With
so
the DOT?
The DOT didn't feel like the aesthetic component should be part of their funding of the project. So that's why we have to do it separately.
Okay, so where does that funding comes from then?
So that's in our CIP as city
The
participation.
city's portion of that
Yep.
project? Okay. I just want to make sure everyone understands how that's working, so. Okay, so we'll see the bridge this year.
So starting in the middle of the year, there is about, I want to say we have 3 weeks that they can close down Marion Boulevard in order to erect some of that. So you'll see it in stages, but
Sure.
depending on how fast they go, they do have 90 days to complete that. So it just depends on how far along they get.
Yeah. Okay, that's exciting. Any other questions?
Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I would like to, I mean, I understood this two-phase installment process for this bridge. I mean, Mike has kind of explained that to us in the past, but if we're considering, if it's possible, it's going to be a pretty extended period of time before we can put up those lighted pillars, just because we need the state to sign off on that project. If they're not funding any of that, I would ask us to put forth any additional effort or request. We can do that on our own. Because to me, that just absolutely tops off that bridge. And if they're not funding any part of that, Mike, is there any way we can get them to allow us, once their piece is done, even though they haven't signed off on it 100%, that we can get those pillars done, even though they're not funding any part of it?
We can
To me,
certainly-
that really makes that entire bridge project.
Yeah, we can certainly try. The problem is they don't want you to touch the bridge project until they have fully accepted it, or you run the risk of losing that money. So then that 80% of the $2 million would become 100% city.
Well, I don't want to
So-
risk it. I just want to get, is there a way they understand what we're doing with that project and it's not part of their funding, that we can still maybe take on that part of it? Going, at least not to wait 2 years down the road, but to get it done sooner than what you're describing.
We will certainly try, but
All
the DOT has processes and policies that they do not like to change from.
Yeah, we learned that. I guess my question would be, can we start the whatever preliminary work there is on those
That has
pillars,
already started.
the design work and all that?
Yeah, Cara Briggs Farmer has already started that.
So that's already in process.
Yep.
So as soon as we get the sign off from the DOT, they can't be manufactured already, or can they be manufactured?
No, they can be manufactured ahead, and as soon as we get the sign off, the problem is you just never know when that's gonna show up. All of a sudden, it just shows up in the mail that you've,
I see. Okay,
Some of it's up to the planning by the city.
but we will do everything that is in our
Okay.
power to accelerate that process, but
we know
we
you.
have to follow their process.
Yep. Yeah, so we trust you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, just a question. Does the state DOT have any purview over the structural attributes of the pillars before they are installed? Do they weigh in on that at all?
So they have reviewed this set of plans and went over it. So that was part of what our structural engineer did, was to make sure that it could support the future pillars that are set on it. So they have reviewed that component of it, if that's your question. In the
Yeah,
future, as part of the city project of putting the decorative pillars on there, they will not review that at all.
okay, thank you. So what I was really searching for there, if that was going to chew up time to receive their final approval, but it doesn't appear to. So thanks.
Yeah, more of it is them doing the audit on the existing bridge, and it just takes time for them to get through that process.
Okay, other questions on this? E4 is your last item, Mike.
So E4 is the first reading of our truck ordinance modification. I just wanted to bring some stuff to city council. There was an email that was sent out by me, kind of going over what could possibly be brought in for revenue as part of it and what it would cost to run the program. And then I also wanted to be clear on what an oversized load is. I think there was still a little confusion as to whether a dump truck was. So these four are kind of the main oversized loads that you would see in the city of Marion. So the top left is a typical excavator that would be on any subdivision or street reconstruction project. The bulldozer, bottom left, construction, actual material, the top right, similar to our library or fire station, large facilities like that. And then either a grinder, miller on the bottom right. Those tend to be your oversized loads that you're going to see in Marion. So a dump truck, a cement truck is not considered oversized. It could technically be overweight, but we would not know that unless it was pulled over by the DOT and weighed, because our police department does not have the scales in order to determine that. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. I think there's a little bit of confusion on that at the last meeting.
I thought that was very helpful that you sent that out and clarified that.
So as the ordinance reads, the council may adopt a policy authorizing the city engineer or his/her designee to, upon application of good cause, being shown therefore issue a special permit in writing authorizing the applicant to operate or move a vehicle or a combination of vehicles of a size or weight or load exceeding the maximum specified by state law or the city over those streets or bridges named in the permit, which are under the jurisdiction of the city, for which the city is responsible for maintenance. And that said policy shall be adopted by resolution and shall include a schedule of fees. Said policy and schedule of fees may be amended as necessary by resolution. So by modifying the ordinance, which does take 3 readings, we're not necessarily making truck permits a requirement, as it says the council may adopt. So I would propose that we adopt the ordinance, and then on the 3rd reading, we would have a public comment period and the resolution for the truck permits, in which we would receive comment from the public and either adopt that portion of it or not. But at least this fixes the ordinance so that we don't have a requirement for a permit and don't have the permit.
That makes sense? Okay, any comments or questions?
Mayor, very quickly.
Hi, Kara, go ahead.
The only thing that I would add to that is that if we are going to have weight restrictions, we do have to have the permits under state code. And that's because under state code, if we post weight and size restrictions and somebody is caught driving on them without a permit, it's a misdemeanor under the state code. And we've already run into that issue one time here where someone was given a ticket for not having a permit in Marion, even though we don't have a permit policy now. And so it's very unlikely that that would happen again. And I believe we worked with the county to get those charges dismissed. I believe that was the final outcome. But essentially, if we're going to comply with the code, my position would be that even though our ordinance would read as the permit policy is optional, the Iowa code does not. And so if we're not going to have permits, then we need to not have weight restrictions, which quite frankly, I would also recommend against.
And we do have one bridge that does have weight limit restrictions on it based on the structural component of the bridge.
So it's not advisable that we get rid of weight restrictions. And so based on what Kara is saying, the recommendation is to adopt the permit or institute the permit.
That would be my recommendation unless we want to take the risk that we have to continue to work with the prosecutors not to charge anybody who's pulled over and charged with this in the city of Marion. And I generally don't like to have our laws be at conflict with the state laws. The other thing that we have the option to do is we don't necessarily have to adopt the fee schedule. We can adopt the policy and have the permits without the fees. But if the concern is that the permit process takes up staff time, then waiving the fees would be kind of defeating the purpose, which would be to ensure that we're not spending staff time without some sort of compensation for that or making up for that.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
Mayor, I got 2 questions.
Yes, Steve?
Mike, so in your email you sent us, you indicated that the only amount of time for each of these permits is just the 10 minutes to issue it. So no other time is needed related to any of these permits after they are issued?
That would be correct.
Okay, one other comment I would make is the $400 that is being proposed in here for annual permits, is that the same fee as Cedar Rapids?
That is the same for Cedar Rapids and for the state and county.
Well, yeah, and I understand where the number came from. I just wanted to confirm that. I guess I would, if we're going to put this in, I would maybe throw out the idea that our annual permit should be less than that, since we do not have the roads or the trucks that may be using that in Marion. Marion does not have the amount of roads that the county has, or certainly that the city of Cedar Rapids has. So I guess my thought is, why would we use the same amount as Cedar Rapids? They have more roads to protect or to cover. Should we consider a lower annual amount?
And I guess that's a policy decision staff will do, whatever the city council directs.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Steve, on that point, I guess what that suggests is that for the annual permit, it's kind of geared to the total linear distance of roadway that is available for transport. I have a tendency to look at it from a little different perspective, and that is, if the $400 is consistent with what the county and Cedar Rapids does, I think there is value in setting uniformity of, I'll say compliance, that's not necessarily the best word, from one jurisdiction to another. I do wonder if we had a lower price on our annual permit, would that have the unintended consequence of driving up traffic in Marion? So I just, without really having clarity or an expectation of that unintended consequence manifesting itself, I would like this to maintain uniformity on somewhat of a small regional basis for what this all costs.
Mike, is there a real risk of that happening? That if we had a lower fee, that we'd have, I mean, I would think that these trucks are, I mean, they have a purpose for where they're going, and so they're gonna be using the road that they're gonna use, whatever the fee is.
Yeah, I mean, what we would prefer is that they stay on 113 and not drive within the city. The ones that are driving within the city should be for the subdivisions or construction projects that we know about. We have had incidents, though, that trucks use business 151 thinking that that is a state highway and causing damage to our roundabouts because of that. So I don't know if that's going to cause more or less people to drive through, to be honest. Right now, there's some that don't pull permits, and there's some that we do the hold harmlessness with. So.
Okay, anything else on this? Any further thoughts or questions or things to consider? We're not adopting an actual fee schedule though.
No, we're only changing the ordinance, which is what I read.
Yeah.
The adoption of the actual policy, I would propose during the third reading of the ordinance, and that's when we would have a public comment period.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time to think about the actual fee schedule.
But as proposed from staff, it matches Cedar Rapids, Lynn County, and the state.
Okay, anything else on this one? Okay, moving on to community development. Thank you, Mike. We have Tom here. F1 is marked. This is F1 and F2.
I just wanted to mark so that you understood that the presentation was just held, and then we would have a resolution on the agenda for Thursday if there are any questions specific to that after the presentation. I didn't have any additional comments unless the council did.
Okay. Any additional comments on the presentation earlier?
I have one, Your Honor.
Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
I wasn't able to see that because it was at the 3 o'clock start. So I would just ask Rachel to push that link out as soon as it's loaded up and available so that I'll have time to review it and ask questions prior to Thursday if need be.
We should have the video up tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Tom, when did the master plan get posted on the city website? Was that recently or was that earlier in January?
I believe it's been up there. We may have posted actually in mid-December. I'll check and see for sure, but I think we posted at the time Planning Commission reviewed it. So it was a draft at that point. So I believe it's been up there a while.
Okay, thanks.
The Planning Commission, I don't know if it was mentioned, but the Planning Commission did review the document as well. We did a briefing in December and then did another briefing and a recommendation that came out of the Planning Commission at the January meeting and for recommended approval to the City Council. And that's where we're at with the public hearing on Thursday. We've also presented it to the Uptown District as well. I believe at the last meeting, there was a conversation about it. And then the steering committee consisted of quite a few folks from Uptown businesses as well. It's really difficult to get the word out on documents like this, but we're trying to do what we can.
Okay. Anything else on this item? Trying to see when it was posted. Okay, moving on to F3.
So on Thursday, there'll be a public hearing regarding a proposed rezoning of property located east of 15th Street, essentially the Marion Independent High School property from A1 to the PI district, public institutional. Obviously, we haven't gotten to the zoning of this ward yet, or this would have been rezoned with the map update. Currently in the A1, the school could proceed and develop things, but there'd be conditional use permits and different ways that they would need to proceed if they want to do facility updates, which I think everybody's familiar with the proposal for stadium improvements at that location. With the rezoning, they would go to the PI district, which would be an appropriate district within the zoning code. And then the review of that project will occur internally. I just want the council to know that. So the PI district is for public institutional uses. We would then receive any site plans and such that would come to staff and reviewed internally as a part of the redevelopment of the school grounds there. So I think that's the biggest change that would come with the rezoning. If you recall, several years ago, we made schools conditional uses in the A1 district specifically because we weren't seeing any of the plans and they were just being brought forward without any review. And so this process brings that review and requires it to be done, but it is administratively done and not in the public setting. So. And just for a reminder, one of the reasons for that is that a conditional use permit is actually processed through the Planning and Zoning Commission and then goes to the Zoning Board of Adjustment for approval. So that never would have come to council before it was in the hands of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Those large scale plans like that, the board doesn't really see those as often. So it's just better fit, I think, to keep it internally. Once we understand that the property is zoned appropriately, all of the internal review processes would be handled administratively. So staff, Planning Commission did review this and was supportive. We did receive some comments at P&Z, and then we did receive a letter of support, I believe, today. Rachel, is that correct, from Superintendent Brower?
It was sent earlier this week, but I forwarded it.
Okay, so you guys have received that. Okay, and so outside of that, we haven't had a lot of submitted comments, but we've had a lot of calls and questions. I wouldn't say a lot. We've had a few calls and questions about what's going on. In the packet, we did illustrate the notification that we did for the rezoning. And so there was quite a few people were notified. So there's probably a pretty good knowledge of what's going on in the property. I do anticipate there being some folks and questions at the meeting on Thursday. And there'll be 3 readings of the ordinance.
Okay, questions, comments? Pretty clear. All right, F5.
Yes, so the council is well aware of Mr. Green's proposal to develop a climate-controlled storage facility at the corner of 151 and 13. We've reviewed this on a number of different occasions. I won't go into a great deal of detail on this. But the council did direct staff to proceed with an ordinance amending the BR district to allow climate-controlled self-storage facilities to be located in that district. Mr. Green has proceeded to request a rezoning of that property to the M1 district, which is manufacturing districts. Staff has indicated from the get-go that we were not supportive of that. I think we've indicated to the council that we were not supportive of that. It didn't match with the city's comprehensive plan. And as such, we've been pretty forward in saying that we wouldn't support it in our staff reports. However, Mr. Green did choose to move forward with the rezoning request. It did go to the Planning and Zoning Commission. They reviewed the land use plan amendment and they approved the land use plan amendment. I think there was some confusion there, but ultimately the zoning, they did not recommend approval of. So the council is getting that recommendation from the Planning Commission to not recommend rezoning the property, the M1, and staff as well does support that recommendation. I think it's important to point out, and you guys had the staff report. I wasn't going to spend the time to walk through all of the pieces to the staff report, but I think it's just important to point out that we've been very forthright with Seth, Mr. Green, that we're supportive. We need time to develop the ordinance. We've got a lot of things going on in the hopper. We're responding to a development concern. We've got meetings this week. We're going to present something to the council at the next meeting to kind of outline what we're thinking as it relates to amending the ordinances. It just takes time. That said, we've indicated that we're not proceeding to rezone this ward. We're not going to proceed with a city initiated rezoning to a district that's going to preclude him from developing this. And if we did, we would have to go through the Planning Commission and this council to do so. With the direction the council's provided for us, I don't think there would be support for anything that we would propose that's contrary to the council's directive to include self-storage in the BR district. So while this may hold up his desire to move forward, there's nothing being done to try to preclude him from continuing. And currently the property is zoned in a manner that does allow the use to be built. So he could pull a permit tomorrow on the project. So I don't know why, outside of just a pure and simple desire to solidify the thing more quickly by rezoning to M1. But at this point, and consistent with the Planning Commission recommendation, we're recommending that it be denied. But there is a public hearing scheduled for Thursday, so he'll have his opportunity to speak to the issue. Any questions on that?
So you said the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the
Land use plan amendment.
The comprehensive plan amendment.
Yeah.
But not the rezoning.
Correct. They recommended approval.
Right, okay, recommended approval.
So
So they're both in one.
public hearing, we would recommend denial of both.
I see.
You won't see staff go against the Planning Commission very often, but I do believe there was some confusion on what was being discussed as a part of that conversation.
Okay. So there's nothing stopping the developer from getting a permit and building this project,
Correct.
but he wants it rezoned.
Correct. The desire is that if it's built and then the ordinance is changed or the zoning is changed to the BR district without the amendment that council has directed us to do, he would be a legal non-conforming use. But we've indicated that we're not going to bring the ordinance forward until such time there's been a discussion. We're not trying to circumvent his ability to build this or beat him to the punch on a zoning approval. I think everybody knows we're trying to work together to get this. I think the council has definitely indicated a desire to see this there and supports the project. So.
Okay, yep, I got it now.
Yep.
Any other questions on this item? Okay, any questions on F7? I guess that's the rezoning. Moving on to F8. I'll turn this over to the Mayor Pro Tem for F8 through F11.
So F8, this is the exciting project that we've been talking about for a long period of time. This is the Broad and Main project. So as a part of this project and moving through the process, there is an internal review, the central corridor review for the property and the development plan. There's been a great deal of work and a lot of conversation internally. As you can see in the staff report, there's been a lot of conversation. We're really excited to see the project move forward. What you're seeing on the screen is a site plan with some landscaping associated with it. But I think as you walk through the staff report, there was a great deal of detail put into that. Nicole did a great job in addressing those concerns and addressing the project as a whole. You'll see through there that the elevations they look great. They're going to match into the Uptown very well. We've taken that to the Uptown board. They're supportive. The Planning Commission has reviewed it. They're supportive as well. And then, there's obviously the recommendation to proceed with the project. We do need to ensure that there are appropriate encroachment agreements and for some footings and balconies that are approved as a part of the project before we get too far down the road. So those are conditions of the approval. We've already received the documents that outlines where those are. There's some footings that are going to extend into the right of way because they are building up to the property line. And then there's some balconies that overhang on the north side. And I believe there's a couple on the south side too. And then there's some eating areas that are extending into on the east side of 12th Street. And then obviously there's some on the west side with the improvements to keep the property flat along the west edge and the stairwell that extend into the plaza area. I could walk through that document if you like, but I know there's a lot of information. If there are specific questions, I'd rather move in that direction if you guys have some questions for me. But a pretty exciting project. There's been a lot of coordination. We're meeting about every 2 weeks to make sure that things keep moving forward in the right direction, and that the streetscape plans and the project before us are kind of moving together in a coordinated effort.
Okay, questions, discussion? Okay, doesn't look like we've got any questions on this one. Let's move down to the next one, which is F10.
So yes, there's a number of items related to the Green Park apartment project. So we've got the final consideration of the zoning. This is the Y site. And then we've got the approval of the final site development plan. And then also we have the preliminary plat that's on the agenda for approval. I thought we'd just focus primarily on the final site development plan, just because I think we've talked through the plat and a lot of the issues or concerns there may be with stormwater, that's all been addressed. I think there was a letter received that went to, or from the neighboring condominium association. We've responded to that letter since the last meeting, and there should be, I think we've addressed their issues. They may still have some concerns, but from our perspective, the developer has worked to counter any of the issues that the neighborhood brought up. There is quite a bit of green space being proposed with the project, so stormwater in our mind is not going to be a concern, which I think was the major issue at hand. I wanted to just point out that you can see here that we've talked a lot about the project as a whole. There were 3 buildings. And really what we're seeing here is the final site development plan for the first phase. So generally in a project like this, they're not going to build all 3 buildings at one time. So you're seeing the first phase. So they've submitted the final site development plan for the building along 31st Street, 1 access point in the parking behind. So each one of these phases will be brought forward each time before they are built. Just so there's an understanding of how this will move forward. So you'll see each one of these projects as they come forward. The one thing I just want to identify is that you're going to have one way in on 31st Street. When they build the project to the north, this is west is up on the illustration here. When they build the next building to the north, you'd have that second egress onto 31st Street. And then ultimately the building on the south, which would be the left-hand side of the page, would be the larger building, and would be built and tied into the other access points consistent with the preliminary site development plan. I know there was some talk when we were approving the preliminary site development plan about access onto 10th Avenue. The ultimate preliminary site development plan was approved with the access onto 31st, the 2 access points. So there is no access proposed at this point on 10th Avenue. And just I would ask if there's concerns with that or a desire to see something that between now and that period of time that conversation is brought up. So I know there was some comments at the time, but it was ultimately approved without the access onto 10th Avenue. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. So it's not a surprise when we get to the second or third phase, whichever one they move forward with next.
Great, questions? Steve?
Questions, Tom. I think I was the one who probably brought up that issue about a 10th Avenue access, so that both of them are not turning out onto 31st Street. To me, that still has some validity. And I know early on, there was still talk about doing a traffic study along 10th and 31st Street. Is that traffic study still being planned, and will that be a factor into that decision, whether we want one exit out on the 10th Avenue?
I think with the understanding of where they sat on the a review of the traffic modeling, just going off the pure data on the different uses, the YMCA versus the apartments,
Yeah.
that there was some, that I think engineering was satisfied with that preliminary analysis, that there was not going to be the desire or the necessity for a full traffic study at that location.
Oh.
But so I think that was where that was kind of left. And I know there was some talk, but ultimately it was approved without the access point. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was consistent with that. So there wasn't, you know, so that there wasn't confusion 18 months from now when, or sooner, whenever that third phase comes in. So that might be a question for the developer if they're available on Thursday.
Yeah, well, I brought that up last time. Again, to me, that still has some validity, so that splitting that traffic up, because 10th Avenue, the width of the streets are the same. I marked them off, actually. I always thought 10th Avenue was wider than 31st. I think they're the same. So again, that's more of a personal opinion. So I think the city staff can probably work on that one as well. One other question I have for this first phase, in order for them to complete that, are they going to have to have the old Y building tore down in order to complete this first phase? Will that be part of that first phase?
That is a very good question. I would assume, and I think it's a good question for the developer, but that they would want to have that site cleared as a part of it. It is showing some of the parking improvements in the vicinity of the existing building. I'm having a hard time.
Yeah, it looks close. I don't know if the driveway could be put in with that building there. Again, if I'm going to say, is this a good looking project? It's going to be a lot more good looking project if the old Y building is tore down. I'd be concerned if they're going to try to put up phase one and leave the old Y building there. To me, that is just not, I think, what we want as an indication of this new project going forward.
I can get some clarity on that before Thursday. And the developer should be on the call on Thursday if I can't get that clarified between now and then.
Okay.
Any other questions? Grant?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Tom, as I'm looking at the phase one and the single driveway that has its connection to 31st Street, I'm trying to envision, and I am looking on Google Maps, if that driveway is on center line with the front of any house on the west side of 35th or 31st. What my concern is simply, and I wish I would have thought of this long ago, is cars leaving the complex, are they going to have their headlights shining right in the front on the front of somebody's living room that lives there? My guess is, looking at Google Maps and the aerial views, it looks like it might actually just be between lots, but I am interested that there's some confirmation of whether or not there's going to be kind of that visual impact on an adjacent property. And you may counsel me to say we can't worry about that, but it does seem to be a potential concern.
Yeah, I'll take a peek at that between now and Thursday as well.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right.
Okay, under other department discussions, we have a discussion regarding fire sprinkler water services and ADA entrance improvements for 7th Avenue Reconstruction project. Mike's back.
Yes, Your Honor. So there's a lot of documents in your packet. But we're going to kind of go high level, discuss some of the items, and then we're kind of on a time crunch here. So I am going to do a little pushing to try and get some direction so that we can actually put some motions on the table for Thursday in order to keep this project moving. If we delay answers to this, this will delay 7th Avenue reconstruction. So I know we'd like to give you guys as much time as possible, but we're down to the wire. We need to keep moving on this project. I know some of these topics have been brought to you before, but now we need to actually make decisions that affect property owners as we move forward with these projects. So if we can go to I guess before we go to the next slide, this is just the general, this is the project location. So it's 7th Avenue from 8th to 12th. And then it also includes 10th Street from 6th to 8th. So it's a fairly large project. Right now, the estimate is $6.8 million. So it's not a small project. We can go to the next slide. So again, the main topics are fire sprinkler and ADA entrance, but we have several issues there that we're going to talk about. Some of them are just high level that we don't necessarily need an answer today. But similar to how we talked about the truck permits, the last one, we're just going to start at the top and work our way down talking about them. So again, the project overview, you saw the scope of the project. It's a complete reconstruction. So we are redoing water main, sanitary sewer, storm sewer. It's a complete reconstruction of this project. Some of these facilities are over 100 years old, so they need to be replaced. We actually have fire hydrants in the Uptown that the fire trucks cannot actually hook up to because there's not enough water pressure that it actually will create a vacuum. So the fire department actually can't use some of those, and that may not even be known out there, but so we're going to fix that while we're doing this project. There were water tax and incentives that were put in your council packet and ADA incentives. So the fire sprinkler incentives, that is basically only if they do a complete sprinkler system. It does not, from what we understand, does not include just stubbing that 4-inch service into the building, which is what we're proposing at this time. Right now, we do have a couple buildings that actually have what's called a dry sprinkler system in there right now that has no water service connected to it. So when we install our street project, we'll connect the water main to that, and then it'll be a live sprinkler system. So on those buildings that don't have a sprinkler system today, we want to at least provide that 4-inch service into the building, and then at a later date, then the fire sprinkler system could be installed. If they went ahead and did the full sprinkler system today, they could do the tax write-offs if they install that entire system. So it just depends on what the business owners want to do. But we would like direction on that. So on the water system, we're looking at a 4-inch line that's going to go from our water main into the building. And then the domestic line or the drinking water line would be a separate line, and it would match what they have today. So if they have a 1-inch service going in there today, we would put in a new 1-inch service copper line with the project. So just talking about the sprinkler service, we're looking at $15,000 per building to run that in there. So there's about 38 properties. So obviously the properties that are more important or more of a need for the sprinkler system with those are those that actually share a wall. Because if one catches on fire, it has the potential to take down the entire block versus those are standalone. For example, the old Witz building, you know, that one can be more isolated because it's not connected to anything. But at this point, because we're tearing the street up and doing all these improvements, we want to put that water service into every building that possibly wants it or that we require. Other cities have done streetscape projects and they have required the business owners to put this in. One thing that they have typically done is they've either applied for grants or the city has paid for it. So here's kind of, I guess the first question is, do we want to protect our Uptown and require the 4-inch services into every building as part of this project? Is the first question.
Mike, just to add to that, I think that you would find that this is an area where Chief Crable would make her strongest possible recommendation that this is something that the city pursue. In essence, the last thing that we want to have is to put all this beautiful new infrastructure in the Uptown and then have a change of use on one of the buildings that then requires one of these lines to be put in, and have them have to come in and tear out a bunch of new infrastructure that we've just put in 2 years earlier to put a fire line in. But I don't want to speak for Chief Crable. She's certainly capable of piping on her own.
Yeah, it will never be cheaper than it is while we have everything tore up.
Is it the 15,000 per building? That's the cost of what you're talking about at this
Yep.
point, right? And there's, what'd you say, 38 buildings?
Yep.
Thank you.
So the Word document that was in your council packet, that's almost a $600,000 investment. So
Which is not part of the project cost, or it is
I don't know that it's included in there at this point.
the 6.8 million?
Yeah.
Oh, we don't know if it's part of that or not?
I'd have to look through the whole estimate to see if it is, but that's why, we'll get to that question later of who's paying for it. The first thing is it Uptown important enough that we want to protect it?
So I would say yes, right? I would say that we have it tore up. That's the time to put those water lines in.
I would say yes also.
I agree with that.
Yes,
Okay. So then the next question is, who pays for it? So we can make the property owners pay for 100% of it. The city can pay for all of it, or staff's recommendation is we do it 50-50. That's where I would like some direction.
In that discussion, I have to stay out of it, so I'll let Colette handle that discussion.
So when you say 50-50,
What's that?
does that include grant opportunities for both parties, or?
The problem is with this, because of the time, we don't have time to apply for a grant. Most grants are not retroactive. You have to apply for them before. So if we want to delay the project a year, yeah, we could apply for some grants, but
The timing will impact
Yep.
that. And have you had any feedback from our Uptown businesses about what's happening? Have you heard anything?
Brooke has had some conversations with them, not necessarily about the specific water services. The ADA will be a little easier conversation to have when we get to that. I know that Chief has reached out to the other cities that have done this, and in that case, the cities have paid for it or they applied for the grant. But we are providing a public good as well to a private, and so that's where we came up with the 50-50. So again, it's a policy decision. I know you guys don't like to be under the gun, but we got to know so that when we go and meet with the property owners, we can say this is the direction that council gave when we have that discussion with them.
Colette?
Yes, Renee.
When you're finished, I just wanted to mention that I didn't know if you were done, but I had a couple of questions.
Yep, go ahead, Renee.
Okay, thanks. So I like the 50-50 split idea. I'm wondering if you could find evidence of other communities that we often compare ourselves to who have maybe done this. And then just secondly, if there was a way that the city could front the cost and put some kind of payment plan together, especially if some of these businesses have no idea this is coming. I do think that they should have some skin in the game because they'll reap some benefits, but I also think we might have to take some of the onus up front to give them time to plan this in financially, especially with last year and, business closures, et cetera. I would want to be sensitive to that, but I do agree that I don't know if 50-50 is the right number, but I think that there needs to be some skin in the game on their part.
Okay, Steve, did I see you had questions too?
yeah, I agree with Renee's comment completely. I think we kind of talked about this a month ago when this notion was being brought up, when we're talking, I think, about the streetscape. And eventually we're going to have to talk about the the water connection, water fire lane connection, as well as the ADA. I think some of our comments back then is we'd rather see the city invest some money into these areas for the Uptown area and maybe cut back a little bit on what we're doing in some of the streets. I think at that time we were talking about whether we're going to have bricks in all of the streets uptown and all of that. And I think there were a number of comments talking about rather be helping our business owners uptown to protect their business and make them safer rather than have maybe nicer looking streets, which we all didn't agree with, I think, brick streets at that time anyway. So I agree with Renee's comment.
Okay, other comments, discussion? Will?
So if we were going in and reconstructing a residential street and putting in new water lines, would we charge the homeowners that are getting the new water lines for the new water lines?
No, and we're not charging the businesses for the new water lines for just drinking water. We're only charging for the fire sprinkler service, which is separate.
Gotcha.
Other than, let's say that it's a building that has one 1-inch service but they want to have a separate one that's metered for, say, an apartment above. Because it's an additional water service, we would charge them for that, but that's something that they're asking for.
Are you needing answers tonight or answers Thursday?
I would like direction tonight so that I can put motions on Thursdays.
It'd be nice to know if that 600,000 was included in the 6.8 million or not, because that might sway my decision.
Yeah, so
one
that
way or another.
6.8, I believe when that was put together, that also included the bricks, which we have taken out. I'd have to go back and look at it exactly because things are constantly fluctuating. So yeah, I would have to look at the detailed cost breakdown to see if it included the 4-inch service, and I could look at that tonight and get back to you, but I can't tell you at this moment.
Because I'm hesitant of saying charge the business or the building owners half, we'll say, like what some of the council members have said, mostly because it's an improvement that we're making them do, yet they may not ever use it. I mean, I understand what you're saying, where if a restaurant went in and they had to put in sprinklers per code, then it's going to be there. But if 50 years and there's never a restaurant in there and it never needs a sprinkler, they paid for something that they're never going to necessarily need. So I'm kind of leaning towards saying that the city would pay for it all.
And I know it was brought up about, paying it over years. I do have in there that, the city pays for half and then the other half could either be a voluntary assessment over 10 years tied to our interest rate, or if they wanted to just write a check, depending on if they wanted the write-off or not. I mean, there's plenty of options out there.
Grant, looks like you had unmuted as well.
Yeah, I can't be in stealth mode on this Zoom thing, can I?
Nope.
So I generally, in concept, I agree with cost sharing of 50-50. And I certainly am, amenable to some kind of a structure where we upfront the costs and then recoup the 50% over time. Regarding Will's somewhat of a springboard off of your comments. So restaurants obviously have a requirement because of the nature of their operations to have sprinkler systems. A restaurant could be right next door to an adjacent building, direct interface between the two buildings, and whatever is going on in that other building does not have a sprinkler system. And what worries me, and this is just the nature of vintage downtown areas, what worries me a lot is that an unsprinkled building could have deleterious impact even on those that have sprinklers, but any others that might be in that same building complex that don't have sprinklers. So I guess what I'm really trying to think of is is there a necessity and is there a means by which we can incent all business owners or building owners to end up having sprinkler systems in what is structurally a pretty compact environment? Hopefully that all made sense.
Yeah, so Grant, that actually does exist today with that tax incentive that I put in there, but that's only if they install a full system. Then that service line to the building would be included with that. But only just the service line to the building would not account for that tax incentive. But right now, there's an existing tax incentive if they want to put a sprinkler system in there.
Okay, it looks like Renee, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, and Randy could probably answer this to some degree, and maybe Deb, but won't the business owners or the building owners rather have some cost decreases as a result of these improvements, maybe insurance or other types of benefits? And I'm sure it would help with marketing in terms of there being empty spaces. So I know it's not a one-to-one money recoup, but it seems to me that there are some definite cost savings. Is that true? And can we list out what those might be other than insurance, if there are any, just to kind of throw that into the mix for consideration?
Is Randy on?
It looks like he's on, but I don't see that he's unmuted, so. Oh, here he is. He's coming slowly. We got him. Randy, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? One moment. Can you hear me now?
We got it.
Thank you. Sorry, and thanks for your patience on that. Yes, so there's a couple things there, Grant. I'll back up on the fire suppression systems on restaurants. A lot of those have what's called an ANSI system, and some of those are a chemical fire suppression system, and those would be the ones in the range hoods, in the kitchens themselves, and then in the what they call the studio or the restaurant area, they would have wet systems. And Chief Crable, please chime in on this one. But to circle back around, you're exactly right. So there's two moving components to this. One is the return on investments for the owner of the buildings would probably see somewhere between a 15 and 20 year ROI on this, because the adding a sprinkler system would be between a 10 and 15% discount on the commercial policy. One of the other things that's a huge component to this is as we move forward, carriers are getting more and more difficult to find that will take on these risks. We've got very old buildings. The construction material dates back a number of years. You have shared walls between buildings that codes have now changed a little bit. That kind of comes into that law of ordinance, which is what we've been running into on the derecho issue. The second component is when you put residential apartments or residential in general, doesn't matter if they're apartments or condominiums, when you got lives that are obviously overnight and sleeping in quarters such as like that, this fire suppression makes a big difference. So the short of the long is on this is everybody wins by having a fire suppression system. The adjacent property owners, the owners themselves, and the tenants, everyone that's at risk on that, whether you're a overnight occupancy or a just simply a patron of the business. So these are all huge working components, and even though we don't like the expenses of this, this is a critical move on these property owners by putting in that fire suppression system.
Thanks, Randy. Renee, did you have another question?
No, sorry, I'll put my hand down. Thanks, Colette.
Sure. Anybody else have questions, discussion? Okay, did you get what you needed there?
So I guess I will put it down as a motion directing us to install the water services with a 50-50 cost share, and then we can always amend it. And I will get information out whether it was included in the $6.8 million cost estimate.
Sounds good. Deb, did you have a comment? I saw that you unmuted quick.
Just a quick comment. I am very impressed by how well versed our council is on this subject. I didn't have to say anything. You all understand the importance, and I am so gratified for that. So thank you very much. If we want to keep our Uptown as an economic benefit to our city, we need to protect it. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Okay.
All right, so the next item is ADA entrances. Now this one's a little different in that we don't have to necessarily require the business owners to do this, but we are proposing a up to $5,000 per entrance that the city would contribute towards the project. So this would have to be an agreement between the property owners and the city. This one also has tax incentives with it as well. And I kind of went through some examples in your council packet. For the most part, other than a few properties such as like the Maid-Rite that would have multiple large entrances, most of them are under the threshold, and a lot of times the city would only be paying around $2,000 to $3,000 per entrance in order to get it ADA, with the owner paying for the other half of that. Some properties it makes complete sense to make them ADA, others may not want to at all. I'll give an example that doesn't make a lot of sense: the entrance to Anderson Bogart. So we can make that ramp so that it matches and it's ADA, but as soon as you open that door, it's a flight of stairs. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to make that one ADA. So each of these is kind of a case by case. Because these are considered historic buildings, they have some different requirements. And so this wouldn't be necessarily a requirement that the city would make them make it ADA. We will obviously make the streetscape as ADA as we can. And so this is basically making the procedure of paying up to $5,000 from city funds with the participation and them applying to the state ADA funds. And then so there's two tax incentives. There's the one that's the cost, and then there's the one that's the deduction if it's up there a ways. So staff's proposal is to move forward with a 5,000 maximum. And again, we're kind of following the example of the other, I think it was Dubuque that I put in there, that have something similar. And then it would actually be something going forward. So we would either identify our business district or something so that in the future, let's say again, Wits End in the future wants to have an ADA ramp, they could apply for those funds as a city program moving forward to make ourselves more inclusive to those that need those ways to get into buildings.
Okay. Questions, discussion?
I would maybe weigh in on this one just a little bit with regard to the ADA requirements. It is important to note that if there's any renovations that would meet a certain threshold, these buildings then just by doing that entrance would be required to make the updates to their other facilities that are not necessarily ADA compliant. Using Mike's example of the Wits End building, I can tell you that not only are the entrances of that building not ADA compliant, but the restrooms would not be ADA compliant, nor would the doorways. And so I don't know, I'm not an expert in ADA compliance in and of itself, but I do know from some looking around that if they meet a threshold of doing recent renovations, they would, if they're going to be a place of public accommodations, that could trigger them to have to do those additional repairs. So we might want to take that into consideration as well. And I think Mike had brought this up to me earlier this week, but I would like before Thursday to take a look as well at the city contributing on all of these projects and how that does play in with conferring the public benefit onto a private business or a public funds, and what we would do if someone who's not in that reconstruction area wanted to apply to receive the same funds.
Okay, thanks, Tara. I don't see any questions for discussion. So you're wanting to hear from us if we are in support of the city doing some type of grant for ADA accessibility. Is that accurate?
That's correct. And so based on the Excel spreadsheet that's included, it would be a total city cost if everyone did all the improvements that are in there of just over $100,000. So it's a much smaller discussion compared to fire sprinkler systems, but it is still a city cost. So staff again would make a motion directing to develop that policy of the 5,000 max based on that policy.
So I would, I'll go, Renee, go ahead and then I'll share what I'm thinking.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, I think at that price tag for all of the benefits, as well as the area that this is in, we want to be as welcoming, and we'll have a lot of businesses as possible. I'm 100% behind this.
Grant?
I found the raise hand button. What an amazing experience. I guess I would agree with the cost sharing or the grant structure that you're proposing, Mike. I just think that if we don't do something like that to stimulate the right improvements being made, then we get into a bunch of secondary transactions that span over many years that leave certain segments of our Uptown area either out of compliance or unsatisfying for visitors. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Grant. Steve?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with what they're saying. The only aspect of this that I looked at is you've got a handful of larger amounts on that page. I'm assuming, Mike, because they are larger buildings on corners with multiple entrances. So the aspect that I wonder if we need to consider, instead of putting a limit of 5,000, obviously takes care of, 80 to 90% of those businesses without a problem. I'm wondering to make it a little more equitable on some of those larger businesses that have a larger potential investment needed for the ADA. Is should we have a larger threshold to at least make it a little more equitable?
So maybe to follow what Steve was saying and the others, I think it's important that we have something like this. We really want our community to be as inclusive, and you use that word, which is a perfect word, I think, as inclusive as we can be. I think that's just very important for Marion. And hearing what Steve said, so perhaps there's a way to, instead of doing a sort of a 5,000 across the board, maybe it's a percentage up to 5,000, right? So you can get 10% of your cost, whatever that is, up to $5,000. That might be a better way to make it more equitable, Steve, which is what you're talking about, but then not sort of max it out where, one would be a $10,000 sort of grant. So just something to consider. Grant, looks like you have raised your hand again.
So just to clarify, it is 50% of the improvements currently up to 5,000 is how it's written. So, but if you wanted to up that cap, we can certainly do that.
Sure. Did you have something else, Steve?
Well, again, I thought your comment is exactly correct, as is Renee's. I think this is an important aspect of the entire Uptown area. The people are not going to see the sprinkler services under, putting that water line underneath. This is something everybody's going to be utilizing, and it's important. I think it's part of the entire appearance and aspect of the entire Uptown area. So again, this is the right time to do it as well. So, I appreciate Mike making sure these are getting done in the most timely manner so that we can move forward. So I'm in support of both of those projects, but in this particular case, I think it's definitely needed.
Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I'd also be in support of that. And to piggyback off what Kara said too, I think that it's a great program to extend out to all of businesses in Marion if they need to do some ADA improvements to help them out with that too.
Yeah, so the way Dubuque did it was only in their business district, but we could make it citywide, or we could put whatever boundary we wanted on it, but that
That'd
way
be
it
great.
was something moving forward too.
Okay, did you get what you needed from us on that?
For that one, yes.
We are marching through your list here, Mike.
And it's gonna get hopefully easier. All right, so the next one is salvaging brick. We understand that for sure on 10th Street where we have exposed brick, the city council would at least like to have an alternate item to find out what it costs to hand remove those, clean them and palletize them for a potential future project, whatever that would be. The direction that staff is going is most of 7th Avenue is actually brick, but there's HMA on top of it, hot mix asphalt. So in order to get to those bricks, we would have to mill it and it would likely destroy a lot of those bricks. So we don't see a high value in trying to save the ones that are on 7th Avenue that are underneath HMA. So our recommendation is only to save the ones that are exposed today. And so that's what staff would recommend going forward. If council would like to save, try and save more than that, we could, but staff is highly recommending against that and only doing those that are actually exposed.
So I guess I brought this up to several staff members and some council members, but is this a time to have a discussion about not only that option that you just mentioned, but putting on the 10th Street portion from 7th to 6th, putting the brick back?
Well, we're building 10th as part of that project. So if that's the direction or
Well, right. And my question is this the right time?
Yep.
Or were you
we need
planning?
to know this.
Were you
now.
planning on having a discussion about that at a
We can have
different
it
time?
now. It's number 6, but we can have it now.
It's number 6? Oh, okay. Well, okay. It could be under number 6. Well, let's stay on that. Your question about 7th Avenue brick first, I guess. So what are people's thoughts on that?
So again, because you're using a mill on top of the brick, not knowing exactly where the brick is, more than likely you're going to damage a lot of brick. So there's not going to be much that we're actually going to salvage. And there's going to be just a lot of expense for that little bit of brick that we're going to save because of all the damage versus the ones that are exposed. And you can see those are much easier to remove, clean and palletize. And even with that, there's quite a bit in there.
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Is there a way to maybe play it by ear in quotations? So if they start taking it up and they find, oh, maybe these aren't going to be damaged like we thought, or maybe there's 2 layers of bricks under there, or whatever they find, because who knows what they're going to find underneath. I'm not for sure on that. That if they find some bricks that can be salvaged, that we salvage them. Because I'd hate to say right now, say nope, we're not going to save them because they're probably going to be damaged, and then lo and behold, they're salvageable.
So how we would bid it, if it was engineer's choice, is we would have an alternate item for the square yardage of the bricks that are exposed. And the rest of the items, they would be using an excavator. So they wouldn't just peel the asphalt off and then see the bricks. They're just gonna take a scoop and it's gonna be whatever's under the bricks and the asphalt all coming up at once. So no, they're not gonna purposely try and peel the HMA off unless we pay for them to bring a mill in just to do that.
Hey, Grant, looks like you've got your hand raised.
I do, and I also learned where the unraise hand button is as well, so I'm doing quite well this evening. I guess I would just think about for the section of 7th Avenue that we're discussing, it seems to me, just from a project execution standpoint, it would just be easier not to plan for the recovery of those bricks. I don't know how long that's been overlaid with HMA and the number of layers and all of that, but I'm just worried that there will be through the milling process, as Mike has described, as well as environmental damage done to the bricks that are under there, that there may be in fact just a relatively few number or a small proportion that's really recoverable. So from a standpoint of project execution and speed, I would be in favor of not worrying about that 7th Avenue section.
Renee?
So are we, if we're only talking about 7th Avenue right now, I echo what Grant said. I'm not in favor of salvaging those. If we're talking about other bricks, I have other comments, but I can wait too.
Trying to stick to the list, I guess, right? Steve, did you have something to add?
Well, I think Nick's earlier comment about what are we going to do, where are we going to put, where are we going to use this brick at? How much brick are we going to need? Probably needs to be discussed by the city council tonight, because that affects whether there's even any need at all to have more bricks off of 7th Avenue. But again, our discussion in the past has been that there was not I recall a lot of support about lots of brick streets because we just don't feel the current ones have held up. But I'm certainly in favor of salvaging the bricks off of 10th Avenue because they are exposed. Most of them are in good shape and salvageable. I don't know where we're going to use them. We haven't talked about that. The last time we were discussing this with Mike, I think we were also asking the question of what is the cost differential between putting in a block of street with brick or just regular concrete. So I think some of those discussions still need to take place, but it sounds like to salvage them under the HMA streets on 7th Avenue is an even higher added cost than trying to salvage those off of 10th Street.
Thanks, Steve. So it sounds like, right, I'm in agreement with, not salvaging what we have on 7th. So based on the return on investment, right, it just doesn't sound like it's there, but maybe we could, I know it's number 6, but maybe we could jump over 5 and have that conversation now about streets and bricks and whatnot.
Yep. So just to clarify, we won't need an action item on Thursday. We'll proceed with just an alternate item for remove and salvage the bricks that are exposed. And then city council will see that number from the bidders. And then at that time, you can give us direction on whether you want to or not. So previously, when we did 10th Street next to the library, it was chose then not to, because we did it as an alternate there too. So then you can see what the actual dollar number is and decide.
Good.
So we will do that as an alternate only for those that are exposed.
Okay.
But now the question that we can allude to then is, what do you want to do with the bricks once we have them?
So I know that I have spoken a number of times that, I didn't think that doing brick streets by the example that we have right outside this window was worth it. After there's been community discussion about the project, about what's going on, about how people, a lot of stuff came out in the public discussions about how people feel about the Uptown, what it means to them, the historic value, all that kind of stuff. And I think there is some, it's worthwhile to explore putting the bricks back on 10th Street, just in that stretch between 6th Avenue and 7th Avenue, as the rest of it is, or one more block down is also brick now. But I think that it's worth exploring that. I think that the community, in my observation, would appreciate that. I think it would be supported by the community. I think it would be a positive thing for the project and for Uptown and for the community to see that portion of Brick Street, because that is what people see now. They see that as their brick street. And I think there is some value in that not being taken away, that's preserved. So I don't know if it's possible. I don't know what the cost is. That's just sort of how I've evolved in my thinking. I still don't think that the brick out here gives you the aesthetics and the value that I think we all thought it would give us. But if it's possible to explore saving that stretch of brick, the original brick, I think, in my opinion, it's worth it.
So
My opinion too.
So it likely would be. I have in my previous occupation, we had a project in the city of Montezuma. We removed 3 blocks of existing brick and put 1 block back down because you are going to lose some. They're not going to be perfect when you bring them up. You are going to have to pour a concrete base underneath it so that they're not settling just like we did out here. So it's going to be the same price, other than you're not going to pay for the brick. The issue I see with that is because some of that brick is already gone, like the section that would be just north of 6th, that's HMA right now, that taper zone. So those bricks are already gone. So there's not going to be enough brick if we just take that block and put that block back because of the loss of bricks. So we either need to supplement it with a like brick that we could get from that Iowa City company. And so they wouldn't all be Marion brick. You have to be okay with that.
I mean, if it's similar brick, I think the idea is that we'd be saving that stretch of brick street. Yeah, I would be okay with that. I don't know how anybody else feels. So, but go ahead.
I'd say I'd be okay with it too, but I'd also be okay with if you take up all those brick and only half of it can be relayed as brick and the rest is concrete because we're only using our Marion bricks. I'd be okay with that too. In fact, I would think it'd be good to have it down in front of Draper's building along with Boardwalk on the sidewalk. That way, kind of those 2 historic buildings down there at the end of 10th at 6th, Draper's building and then former Wits End would have the historic street and potentially sidewalk in front of them too.
Go ahead.
No, looks like Renee, I'm good.
Oh, go ahead, Renee.
Thanks. So I'm curious about the numbers. I wasn't on council when the streets went in, so I'm not super familiar with the process, but I don't love the idea of the patchwork quilt feel of a half brick street with maybe not even all Marion bricks for the cost. I think if we could preserve the bricks when we remove them, if it's not so costly, and put them into the public area in front of Broad and Main opening up to the park, or maybe in some other structure that we need to build, or in more of a sidewalk area and not a streetcar driven, heavy machinery, oversized load, as we were talking about, area. I feel better about putting them off of a street somewhere and preserving them that way. But in general, I know we've saved some historic buildings and we're preserving a lot of our old buildings, and that's the plan. But in terms of brick roads, I would much rather spend our money on services, transportation, parks, keeping taxes low, et cetera. So unless there's not a huge cost difference to do the brick streets, I'm not in favor of them anywhere. I think they're too high maintenance. They look really bad once they start crumbling apart, and it just doesn't last. So I'd be into paying a little more if we could put it somewhere where it's going to last and not be driven over. Otherwise, I'd rather everything have a uniform, intentional, planned look. So whatever we're doing on 7th, kind of wraps around that whole block area. Thanks.
So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I can tell you you're basically pouring a street and then putting asphalt down and then putting the bricks on top of it. So it is more money to do a brick street than it is for a concrete street. And then there is the maintenance issues, but again, that's a policy decision.
But can we see what that number is? I mean, or some estimate?
Yeah, I can't write this moment, but I would say at least 1.5, if not 2 times what it would normally cost.
For that stretch. So again, what is that?
Yeah, I can pull that up and I can get you an email tonight, but I can't do it right now. Because we looked at different brick alternatives when we were even looking at 7th Avenue. So we have those numbers readily available.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
I guess I just want to say I'm generally not a fan of bricks due to the long-term maintenance requirements that that type of a structure would require, as well as just generally the increased cost for the installation. I do like Renee's idea of repurposing the bricks that would be removed into some decorative structure that dignifies the long-term history of the Marion Uptown. But unfortunately, given the seasonal nature of our weather, freeze thaw cycles, as well as heat in the summer, I just can't get to be a fan of brick roadways.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Will and I were involved in that streetscape meeting that night, and they went through a number of questionnaires at the end and got everybody's feedback. If I recall from that, Will, they asked the question, how many would be in favor of reusing, salvaging? I think the question was salvaging those bricks. The percentage was almost 50% of the people that were at that meeting in favor of salvaging the bricks. That said, it doesn't sound like we're going to be able to salvage enough off of 10th Street to redo that entire block. So therefore, we're going to have to bring in outside bricks to try to match it, making the project probably more expensive, more complex. But I think I would always support from the standpoint to salvage those bricks and find a way to reuse those in some streetscape project, whether it's on somewhere as part of the plaza project or somewhere else. I think there's other opportunities that RDG can come up with. So I'll probably lean more towards that direction.
Anyone else? Renee, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, but I don't need to, thanks.
Okay. Anyone else?
I understand where everyone else is coming from on this when saying not to reuse them in the street. It's just, the historian in me that enjoys the historic aspect of the Uptown is saddened by the fact that we're running out of our original brick streets. I know we've got a couple left that are in bad shape, and I just would love to be able to keep at least a little bit of it. I mean, kind of like the Indianapolis 500 Speedway. They've got a section of the old brick in the Speedway still. So it's kind of what I was thinking, if we can salvage some of it and have a little section at least with original brick from the original brick streets. I think it'd be a great omen to our history. But put my 2 cents in it.
Right.
What we can do for Thursday is I can, again, throw some numbers together in an email, and then we can add this as a discussion item for Thursday then.
Not a final decision, but a discussion item.
Well, if you actually want brick on 10th Street as part of this project, I would need a motion doing that.
Right.
I can add it as a motion on Thursday. If that's
I'm not
okay.
saying we should, but you're saying we should just have a discussion on Thursday.
I would say at least have the discussion, but if there is enough that push to do that, I need to know that so we can incorporate that in the plans again. Because those plans are getting close to, we need to release them and move forward with that. So I have to be able to give Anderson Bogert direction that that's what we're doing so that they can solidify that. So
yeah,
I can add it as a motion as well on Thursday, and we can make a vote on it.
I would be in favor of having a discussion and maybe saving the vote till the next meeting if we can, if it's not going to delay anything.
It's going to delay the project.
Then we have to vote on it. I'm a little bit surprised that it hasn't been brought up, because I think, I'm a bit surprised that it hasn't been brought up for discussion. So, okay.
Your Honor.
Yeah.
Just on that point, Mike, is it possible to define an option or to have Anderson Bogert at least give consideration of the replacement of the bricks on the 10th Street as an option so that we can understand the true cost of installation? I guess I'm just wondering, is it something we can spec as an option and then decide at a later date?
We could do it as another alternative, but I would say for the discussion on Thursday, I can provide estimates so that you at least have an estimate instead of a guess on the number based on the judgment. And again, we looked at different alternatives when we were looking at 7th Avenue. So I just have to be able to get to those documents and pull them up.
Yeah. Well, and Mr. Mayor, I think my guess is at this point is we'll have as much information as we will ever have on this issue come Thursday of this week, which would inform a decision either up or down. Because I don't know. I'm new to this one.
Yeah, I would just urge council members between now and Thursday to just consider it. I think that the amount of goodwill it would earn the project in the city with residents, I think is worth considering. And the positive impact of that on the project itself. Anything else?
Are we still on number 6?
Yeah, we're still kind of on 4 and 6.
We haven't, yeah, we're right.
Still need to talk about number 5.
Go ahead.
If we're on 6, can I bring up another thing about on number 6?
Sure.
As in boardwalks, street sidewalks? Is that, I assume that's not in the plan right now.
The only boardwalks that we've talked about is when we do the pouring of concrete in front of an entrance, that they may have to have a temporary boardwalk / plank to walk over the wet concrete.
Oh, that's not what I'm talking about. So I would love to be able to have some type of boardwalk down in front of Mr. Draper's building, or the Draper building.
We can.
I know he pushed for that for many years when this finally got done, and unfortunately he's not here to push for it anymore. So at least something to honor our heritage and the original sidewalks in Marion. Have a little section. I know I brought it up before, but I think it'd be a great thing for our community to have some historical area right along there, and that'd be a great place to have it since he was a big advocate for it.
I'll have to look at ADA, but I don't know if wood counts as slip non-resistant surface, but
we could do fake wood. I'm sure there's material out there that we could put in that looks like wooden sidewalks or wooden boardwalk. I mean, we've got wooden bridges. ADA would assume they're ADA compliance. Like on the new Grantwood Trail, there's bridges that are made out of wood, correct? Wood
yeah,
plank.
I just have to look into it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so item number 5. I believe it was last year that we went in there and removed a lot of the signs, like the 9-hour parking, 8 to 5, and a lot of those other duplicate signs or signs that you couldn't even read anymore. So with that, the current plans are proposed to have 2-hour parking limits in the Uptown. There's a few loading zones and stuff like next to the popcorn place. We don't need an exact decision on this one, but I can tell you during that same public meeting that we had, I want to say it was like 80% of the people said they wanted to have some kind of restriction as far as time in the Uptown. And then recently when we discussed the library temporary loading zone and the dumpster parking, Brooke also reached out to property owners up there. And again, they wanted some kind of regulation for time in the Uptown. Eventually that'll have to be set by, it's at least a resolution to establish that 2-hour parking in the Uptown. So right now, the plans have it as 2-hour parking. And that way we can still let it. We can always change it if we need to. Is there anyone that's against the 2-hour limit in Uptown at this point? Knowing that we'll have to have an official action at a later date.
Are we talking just with the streetscape on 7th, or are we talking other areas of Uptown also?
At this point, we would only be signing the areas that are going to be under construction for the project. But that could be expanded and we could expand the limits if we wanted to.
'Cause I don't see where 2-hour parking limit is good for the Uptown. I mean, if you go out to a play and go to have dinner, you're gonna be there more than 2 hours. I understand where some businesses want some restricted parking time for like overnight guests, that type of thing. But I don't know if 2-hour everywhere would be a good deal. Potentially in some areas, sure, but maybe along 7th only. Let's see what others have to say about that.
Renee?
Thanks. Yeah, I don't have a problem with the 2-hour parking, although I think Will brings up a good point about a couple of the businesses lending themselves to more than a 2-hour experience. So I wouldn't want to, do anything to jeopardize that. But my larger question is, how are we going to enforce this? Is this police time to chalk tires and that kind of thing? And has that been discussed? Because if there's no enforcement, I'm not for this. I just want to make sure something we're doing will actually, come full circle. I don't just want to have signs as a deterrent. So that's my question, is the back end, behind the scenes part of this, has that all been worked out? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, I don't know, enforcement wise, unless we put somebody down there, it's gonna be hard to do. It'll be like any place else. We'll be chalking tires and checking back with complaints.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And so to that end, I'm not against 2-hour parking per se or some kind of limit, but I'm also not for dedicating a police staff to do this with their time. And so for that reason, I wouldn't want to pass this ordinance because it has no teeth. So I would not be in favor of this until we have a plan to actually mean what we say on the signs. Thanks.
Go ahead.
I think both Renee and Will make a good point. Different reasons why not to have 2-hour parking. So initially, I think I was in the camp of 2-hour parking, and then after listening to these two, it just doesn't make sense at this point to have that 2-hour parking. That's where I am.
So one thing I think, just to jump in, that the council should consider related to that is keep in mind that the character of the Uptown will change with the addition of 100 residential units. And when we've been researching parking in other communities, that was a message that came through very clear in Des Moines in relationship to the East Village, which is a lot like what our future Uptown is going to look like, that they regretted not having instituted parking standards early because the residents that did not want to pay for parking on some of the properties that they were using started to use the street parking all night long. And coming in and doing it after the fact was much more painful and difficult than instituting it from the beginning.
Go ahead.
I get what you're saying there, Lon, and if that is an issue that we're trying to not have, I think metered parking would probably be the way to solve that, not putting up signs that say 2-hour parking only, because again, that's hard to enforce. But no one's gonna know unless someone calls in to complain to the police department, and then they're gonna chalk a tire and then have to come back 2 hours later to see if they're still there. So I think metered parking would be more of an answer for that.
Yeah, and metered parking is the ultimate solution to that problem. You're absolutely correct.
I have one other question on that too. So you saying putting the signs up during the reconstruction, I would assume there's going to be signs with other restrictions that are gonna be put up, or posts anyway, with other restrictions, where if we decide in the future that we want to put in a 2-hour no park or 2-hour limit, that we could just attach a sign to a post that's already in place? Are there gonna be other posts put up for other things?
A few, but there aren't that many posts that are up there. Most of them would be like your street blades. There's not a lot of signs that'll be in there.
Because I would hate to see us making that look nice and pretty, and then every 20 feet, there's a sign that says 2-hour parking only, and make it look ugly. So.
Yeah, I mean, if there's no support for doing regulations to this point, we can just completely take them out of the plans and deal with it at a later date. But as Lon alluded to, when we do that, and as you guys know, when we do that, like no parking on one side of a street, you tend to get a lot of people that are against that. So you could have a large contingency in here that is against those regulations being added.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I appreciate what Renee said about if we don't have a plan for enforcement, we shouldn't make the rule. I think that's, it seems to me that gets a lot of governmental entities into difficulties. I would just offer this as part of our thinking. I think as the Uptown redevelopment unfolds with the plans that we have seen, I think as at the earliest possible point, we ought to set an expectation of what the parking rules are, and to be clear about the enforcement profile. Set the, and I think, Lon, you were suggesting that, set the expectations early so that as the new Uptown unfolds, there is a complete clarity about what the situation will be. So I guess what I'm advocating is not to sit on this for a year. We should have this discussion integral to the considerations we're making here in the relative near term.
And for now, we could take the signs out. This is a 2-year construction project, and then change order them or have them as an alternate. We can bid them as 2-hour signs, and then later tell them to put up 4-hour signs or whatever direction we get during the project as well. Then at least the black posts get put up where they need to go, and the time we can put up whatever signs we want.
Mike, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but could we just spec it to have them put in the poles and do owner provided signs?
Yeah, and that's what we actually do on our street blades. Because they're bought from Prison Industries with our special fonts and logos. Those we actually provide. Same thing with when we do a signal, we actually provide the street blades and the names of the streets as part of the project, and they just have to install them. So we could have it, and they're actually 2 separate items. So the post is one item and the sign is the other. So we could also bid it as the 2-hour parking and just change it at a later date as well as a change order, because you're just paying for the square footage of the sign.
Go ahead, Renee. Renee, do you have?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, I just couldn't click on the unmute. Yeah, I just wanted to go on the record about the parking meters. What I do know about parking meters is, I know some people aren't going to like it, but I think it pays for itself. It doesn't require much staff time compared to a police officer having to chalk tires. It's a use fee, so you don't have to pay for it unless you need to park. So it's not something we're spreading on to everyone and everyone's getting dinged for it. And I think with the influx of new residents coming, it's going to be something that we have to consider not only for the higher density of residents, but also hopefully for all of the people we're going to attract to our beautiful Uptown area, all of the Prospect Meadows people who are in from out of town and out of state, et cetera. So there are going to be a lot of non-Marionites paying for the parking meters. So I know it won't be popular by some. I know they're not the prettiest things in the world, but at whatever point it makes most sense from a timing and costing perspective to go in, I would support meters. Thanks.
So is that something that we could have as part of this project? Or are we at a place where we can't?
So I would guess if we did go to on-street paid parking, it wouldn't actually be meters. It would be similar to downtown Cedar Rapids where they're just signs and then you would have units that you go to or an app on your phone.
Right.
Rather than actual old school meters. But that could be something that we move forward with too. It's just we haven't done the full parking study because of the pandemic. So.
Right.
But that would be more signs than less signs because you would have to mark every stall with a number. But if that's the direction that council would like us to do, we can look at that too.
So I'm changing my mind again, right? Is that okay to do? I mean, we learn more, right? You learn more information and I am convinced the other way. So I might be in that camp, right? If that's something we can do as opposed to the signage and concern about enforcing that, and then hearing Lon, and there's a concern about, right? If we kind of, I think your analogy with the two or one side parking on the street and when you change that, how folks get frustrated. So I think I might be in that camp. So yeah.
And there is an enforcement impact on that as well, because if you don't pay the meter, someone has to issue citations as well. So.
Right.
Yeah, I also am on the team meter, parking meter in the future. I don't know if it's now or if it's in a few more years, but I think, like you said, like what Cedar Rapids, Iowa City does with the kiosk and then have everything, you can make those little signs that number the stalls. You can make them look nice and have them incorporated into the design of the Uptown too. So and might not, I don't think it'd be as much of an eyesore as a 2-hour parking limit sign on a post. So I think that might be something to look into now, or potentially once we do know how the apartments uptown are going to impact the parking on the streets, we look at it then.
So if that's the direction that we start leaning, I would probably take the 2 parking and those posts completely out, not put any signs up, and have that as a follow-up project soon after, because we want to look into it. There's a lot to do in that short amount of period, and I wouldn't want to delay the project. So we could just move forward with no parking regulations and do the on-street parking if that's the direction that council wants to go on that.
Okay, I think Grant has a question.
Yeah, actually, Your Honor, thank you. It's just a comment. So I'm a little bit like Colette. I'm starting to warm up to the idea of having numbered parking spots with then a payment kiosk similar to downtown Cedar Rapids. I would just comment, however, that might be a means to use some of the displaced bricks we were previously discussing, having a kiosk that's constructed out of bricks. I don't know if that's viable or not, just an idea.
Okay, anyone else?
I guess, is there anybody against going down that path of not doing tower parking, but instead looking at metered parking? The much bigger discussion, but we have time on that to have that discussion, and we just take the 2-hour parking out of the project for now.
Fine with me.
Mayor?
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'm fine with having that future discussion, but again, as Mike indicated, I'd really like to delay any decision or any further serious discussion on that until we have that parking study completed.
Yeah,
So
what
we
you'll
can-
find with Go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead, that's it.
Yeah, so with those parking plans, they will generally give you kind of a sense of the stages of parking that you're going to go through. You know, first with, you know, what do you need to do for temporary surface parking? How do you move through the continuum of going to paid parking on the streets, and then ultimately ending up at a point where you may even have some parking ramp or some structures that are kind of the last stage once the area is fully built out. The only other thing I wanted to mention is, I don't know if you've noticed, Jill Ackerman is on the meeting and she did have a hand raised. This wasn't an area that we had set up for public comment, but didn't know if you wanted to allow her to pipe in as well.
By all means. Jill, are you with us?
Sorry, it's Brooke again. So I just wanted to add a little bit of context that this is kind of an issue now as it is, that we've been hearing from businesses that cars are parking there all day long. And with the street construction, there is going to be a pinch on parking. So when we think about where the construction workers parking, where are the business owners parking, where are the residents parking? So we're going to take a really good look at parking, but we may need some flexibility in that the businesses are going to be suffering, and if their customers can't get to them, that's going to make it a lot harder. So we want to continue this discussion and just, I mean, down the road, obviously, we definitely want to do a parking study and we want to move towards that paid parking. I think that's a great solution, but we might need some flexibility in what that parking looks like over the next 2 years. I also wanted to mention that with how the regulations, even though it's not heavily regulated, as in there's no one out there ticketing, what it does allow for is if a business does notice that there's a car parked there all day, overnight, right in front of their business, and it is a 2 or 4 hour parking, they're able to call that in and kind of self-regulate those areas. So there is a benefit to having those regulations up, even though they're not necessarily patrolled.
Any questions for Brooke? Thanks, Brooke.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
All right, unless there's anything else that you guys want to bring up that you want me to look into, I have my direction to add to council on Thursday, and I'll be sending some emails.
Okay, thank you. Final item on the agenda tonight is a discussion on the 2022 budget. Zach.
Good evening, Your Honor and City Council. I'll need your assistance tonight. So if you see Mike come behind me and try to ticket me with his chalk, let me know so I can move to another presentation stall. Yeah, hope to get us out of here in less than an hour. Don't have too many slides in comparison to last time, but we wanted to make sure we were thorough in continuing where we left off last year. Or, I'm sorry. About a week and a half ago during the in-person budget work session. Oh, Terrell, next slide. Sorry, I don't have the button. There's 3 primary areas that we're looking to cover tonight. At the end of the work session on the 22nd, one of the areas that City Council wanted to make sure we looked at is how to propose an alternative budget scenario for the general fund, which would be a flat property tax rate or even potentially a decrease to a property tax rate, given everything that's going on recently, to make sure to be mindful of the impact of that and the cost to residents. In addition to that, provide additional information on new initiatives and studies that we were doing, as well as the ones going forward. And then lastly, review of the recommended salary increases and how it compares to indexes of inflation. So we're going to be covering those 3 areas tonight, and also going through again at the end of the presentation, the budget decision points that we're looking at to make sure we have sufficient information from City Council to come back forth in front of you in 2 weeks in order to present you the tentative budget on February 16th. Next slide, Tara. Before getting started in those 3 primary areas, I wanted to review again the budget priorities for this year. First one is aligning funding the strategic plan initiatives. It's one of the key areas we want to make sure that we continue to move forward with, given the time and effort City Council has placed into making sure that we focus on these areas in future budget cycles. Secondly, looking at competitive pay and benefits for staff, which is primarily made up of an increase across the board, across all positions of 2.5% and a health insurance increase of 6%. Third area, maximize technology investments. Fourth, maintain sustainable rates for all proprietary funds. And then lastly, the city share of the debt shield cleanup, which is a large portion of some of the one-time funding that we're looking to move forward in the FY22 budget. Next slide, Tara. Similarly, wanted to rebase the general fund revenue discussion and just remind City Council that over 80% of our general fund revenue is made up of property taxes. So where property taxes go and how we set that rate will impact how many additional revenue we have available to us at the city. Next slide, Tara. And then on the expenditure side, and once again, this is just the general fund. About 3/4 of total expenditures are related to staff costs, whether it be salaries, employee benefits costs, as well as staff development. Next slide. So for the property taxes, as laid out in the memo that was sent to City Council before the meeting last week, we proposed one of the areas to address the first area, property tax reduction, of reducing it from 14.29 and change to 14.19. That's made up of primarily 2 changes in there, and then a balancing change. The first one is increased revenue. And in looking at our revenue, again, across all the general fund areas, a fortunate finding is that we didn't have budgeted about $87,000 of SRO, which is our school resource officer revenue that was to come in. So that's about $87,000. So that alone is a large, or is nearly half of the 150 we're looking to target to get to a flat property tax rate. Additionally, reducing the property taxes requires additional expenditures. We didn't want to increase any revenue projections. So instead we did go ahead and remove one of the items we had in the budget beforehand, which is a code enforcement allotment. We call it allotment because we weren't sure if it was a position that would be needed. Because part of the efforts that we're currently undergoing and we're going to expect to work through in the next 6 months is looking at our approach to our code enforcement. Tom kind of uses as one of his many jokes he has, in saying one of his favorite things is when people call the city and said, do you have a dead animal, or do you have an animal in your backyard? Our next question is it dead or alive? So it's a great way of getting us to think about is our approach to code enforcement the best way we could be doing it for the city? So there's some potential trickle down effects of that. And also being that it's a new proposal we're looking at, we're not sure yet of the total cost, if there's any, in order to make that switch. So we moved that off of the FY22 requested budget. Those 2 pieces together, nestled in with the removing the emergency property tax levy of the 150 that was presented to City Council on the 22nd, and then a small reduction the associated employee benefits levy, brings us to that new rate of 14.19976, which would, in summary, bring in new property tax revenue of $975,000 to the general fund. Next slide, Tara. So how does that look in comparison to the cost for residents? This slide in front of you will show that historically, going back to 2015 through 2022, of what the cost is per $100,000 of taxable valuation. And previously we had recommended 14.29. Moving it to 14.20 would take it to $801 per $100,000 of taxable valuation rather than 807. So it is a change of $6, and taking it more so, or taking it below where we're at in 2020. However, a little bit higher than where we're at in 2018. One of the other things, just to make a note of with that change, what it would place us at is it would be the second year in a row of property tax reduction. We had a very slight reduction last year, and the year before that we held steady. So it would be indicating, my perception, that we are being very judicious with the funds. Many other cities are looking at certain increases in order to respond to the derecho. Looking at it, in this case, it would be a decrease. As I mentioned, it's $6 from the recommended rate previously, and where it would be in comparison to FY21 is it would actually be an increase of $18 per $100,000 of taxable valuation. Without going into all the details of that, it's basically the rollback. So in 2020, though we had a similar rate, it was at $810. Last year, it was $783 with a lower rate. This next year, it would be $801 with a slightly lower rate. So once again, the rollback plays into how much is taxed per household in the city of Marion. Next slide, Tara. So the next area we wanted to make sure to spend some time on as well is talking about the budget priorities and rankings. And thank you for the detailed questions as to which areas are the highest priority as we're looking to move forward with the new initiatives coming for the city this next year. Next slide, Tara. And in this list, there's a number of things being shown. So I'll highlight the areas that are most noticed, and please let me know if you have any questions on this because it's kind of chock full, a lot of information. One, we have the priority rankings of our general fund initiatives, as well as should mention in there, it's also the equipment reserve fund. Technically, finance would like that's a general fund as well, but it's not the general fund. And as the cost in the next column to the right, the department where those costs sit. Next is what budget priority category that fits into. The one after that, once again, it's a new area we'll continue to be noting when we talk about the budget investments is, does it have strategic plan alignment or not? Because once again, these investments that we have here, whether they be something as small as $8,000 for code enforcement, or something to move forward of the public safety information management system of $300,000, they are looking to move forward, or they are intended to move forward the strategic plan initiatives that we have set forth in the budget. Lastly, we have one criterion that we wanted to put before City Council that we used in making the determination of how to rank these, and that's the implications of deferring. So the idea that if we defer these, what will be the implications to either costs, to the organization overall, or to the public? So it's kind of a broad category, and we have just 3 different categories. So we didn't splice them any more specific than that, and we put them into high, medium, or low. We also have 2 proprietary fund areas that we wanted to call out for new positions, the environmental specialist as well as the equipment operator. And then lastly, we wanted to call out the new studies for FY22. And a little bit later, I'll be reviewing the FY21 studies as well to make sure to give an update as where we're at with those studies, and also to make to denote which ones are 22 versus 21 in there. Next slide, Tara. So, oh, actually, if you can go back one other slide. One of the things I just wanted to highlight, it's not included, wasn't included in the budget memo last written, but it was included in the first one that was sent out, is there were initially 8 unfunded positions that we did not include in the FY22 budget recommendations. So I just want to make that of notice of these aren't all the all the requests that were made to the city. So in this list, what you're not seeing is the unfunded, the 8 positions that were previously mentioned are mentioned previously in the budget memo, as well as we took out the code enforcement officer. So I just wanted to make note of that. Next slide. And in this chart right here, it's just a quick matrix to try to put in alignment 2 things. One, across the bottom, it's showing the prioritization. So the 1 to 15, those projects are laid out in the order that presented on the previous slide. And then the other one, implications of the deferring, with the idea over time, or the idea is the upper left-hand box has those projects that are highest priority and also have the highest implications for deferring. I should mention that's just one criterion we're looking at. So in some cases, you won't see perfect alignment of the deferment of implications of deferring indicating where the prioritization is going to be, because once again, there are other factors that come into making the decision on prioritization, but it's one of the factors that most heavily weighs how we looked at some of these opportunities this next year. And just to go over briefly, the first area of priority in there is the 6% insurance increase. As we mentioned previously, not going into all the detail. Currently, Gallagher as well as Wellmark are recommending above a 6% increase this next year, closer to Gallagher 13%, Wellmark a little bit above that. So we are concerned if we do not continue to increase our health insurance costs, though we have a sufficient fund balance to cover the costs, we'll be starting to have the differentiation between what our true rates are and what we're asking city as well as employees to pay will get wider and wider. So our recommendation is that's the highest priority. After that is the public safety information systems that we mentioned in detail, the reasons why that change is necessary for us to start moving into in the city, and that's a 2-year plan. We're expecting first year implementation around 300,000, next year implementation around 300,000, and we're still waiting to see what the operational cost impact will be. We expect that to be much lower than the 600,000, but that's where we're starting to move through the process right now. The next area in that is the 2.5% wage increase allowance for staff. I have a section laid out about that, which we'll go into that more in detail. So I'll save some of the details for that a little bit later. And then the last one in that quadrant is the mental health liaisons, and is presented before you previously by Chief Kitzmiller. That's one of the initiatives that's currently underway. So we want to make sure that continues to move forward. We've heard success from it initially. So we want to make sure that is included in the budget for this next year. Jumping to the next quadrant down under prioritization, we have in there the new library expenses. And this is also a big figure. And I want to make sure to call out in there. I think it's let me refer to my notes. 447,000 of those dollars in the new library are specifically for the replacement of furnishings as well as new equipment. We're getting a new building and we've delayed any replacements for a very long time because of this. This is finally when we're saying, hey, wait. You don't have to wait anymore. Now we're actually looking to make those investments. Part of that cost will come into FY21 because of the deposit that we'll have to put forth for some of the larger items that will take a number of months to build and prepare for us. And this is the allotment that would be for FY22. The next item in there is the application specialist. Once again, I'm not going to go into full detail for that position. However, that's one of the areas that covers kind of 2 areas. It's a strategic plan alignment piece because it looks at our efficient and effective government of making sure we're fully utilizing our technology as intended, as well as on the maximizing technology of, we know we have underutilized systems out there that an application specialist can help us move into some of the more specific application design and customization that we haven't gotten to yet. The next piece in there is a procurement coordinator. This position would be a brand new position to the city. It would address some of the issues laid out in the city that we found recently when we went through the procurement process for Derecho of how do we respond to new changes in the city in which we need to put forth a new scope of services, do it in a way that keeps with the public process, because public and private have very different processes for procurement, and as well making sure we're being judicious with costs, because that's one of the other pieces that we expect this position to do is, in addition to relieving some of the staff time that, for example, a director, when they go forward and they're putting together an RP, many times it may be their first or second time doing it. So they spend a lot of time gearing up and putting together a process as well as managing it, which this procurement coordinator would do, as well as there's cost savings that can be garnered through making sure we're getting the most competitive agreements, going through a competitive bidding process, and making sure we're complying with all the rules and regulations, especially for some of these larger procurement bids, which if we would not go through the proper channels later, we could end up in litigation. So it's one of the areas that we're looking at as we're growing as a city. It's kind of nestled in there right at the middle of the pack for our prioritization. The last piece in that orange quadrant, and I have to give a shout out to Grant in there. He mentioned about he said the matrix in there looks like, I think, a heat map without the color. So it made me think, Grant, we need to color it up a little bit. So thanks for the notation on that. The last piece in there is a right-of-way tech. And as mentioned previously, when Lon was discussing this, this is one of the areas that really helps us make sure that we're preserving the assets that we are building in the city, as well as making sure that we're getting sufficient oversight and as well as payments on those. It's one of the areas that we think as well we can recoup some additional costs for the right-of-way fees and adjusting those to the current market value for that position. Actually going up before going right is the HR growth and development training. This is kind of this is an outlier in which it's rated high. However, it has a ranking right there. I think it's at 8. The reason for this is the reason why it's noted high is the HR growth and development training for $21,000. It's somewhat of a low cost investment for the expected impact to the organization. What we see with this is this would be an HR development tool, which will allow us to look at current staff, make sure we fully assess where they're at in an employee assessment, to look at the managers to say, how can we work with managers in the leadership training and moving, as we've been a smaller organization, into managers that may come into a supervisory role that are now directors, and making sure there's sufficient training and coaching to move that into that next step, as well as identifying the next layer of management within the organization. It's also a tool that will help us assess new recruits. So when we're bringing them in, we can be more strategic in who we're bringing in for interviews and looking to align skill sets with those individuals that we are targeting for employment with the City of Marion. Going into the right, then we have the permit technician housing admin in there. This position has been highly requested by the building department based on the increased output that they've had over time. And though they've requested 2 different positions, this is the highest request for them. This before housing inspector, in order to help them deal with some of the pent-up demand that they've been dealing with in their area over time. Jumping actually down, looking at the prioritization below, is a part-time rec programmer. And Grant asked a question, I think it was yesterday, about this position. And I'm glad he did, because it clarifies that though this is considered a low priority position, it actually is expected to bring us to leverage some dollars in the organization. What this position is being offered as is it would fund a part-time position to work with the YMCA in order to bring new recreational opportunities to the City of Marion. So we don't currently have any revenue assigned to this position. We actually believe it will bring in revenue, but in order to be conservative in our forecast, we kept that 0 for the first year, not knowing the implications of COVID. But we think this is an important strategy in order to leverage the new partnership with the Y and to increase recreational opportunities, which is one of the areas noted in the strategic plan. The next one in there is the additional hours for the part-time events coordinator. In a similar fashion, it's a $6,000 investment, but we believe that will help continue to grow the events planning, and also to move some of the events planning that used to sit in parks and actually move it formally over to this position. The next one, the part-time receptionist in City Hall. This position is a somewhat of a similar position that we recently funded this last year, in having a part-time receptionist with the water staff moving out and having someone at the front of the building. What they're doing, even with the building closed, is many times during the day we will get people requesting to come into the building, either residents who have a question to come into building, planning, or any of the departments, or we have people dropping off packages or other areas. Before a part-time receptionist, either finance was fielding that, or some staff in city manager's office was fielding it as well. I should also mention that many of the calls are fielded by the finance department, and this has been one of the reasons why we've been looking to move into a part-time receptionist, in order to move staff's time into their more focused areas, meaning finance, or in the city manager's office, whether it be Rachel or now Alicia in there, to make sure her focus is focused on those office or those requirements of the department. And then this part-time receptionist would really handle any of the ancillary initial contacts with residents and other individuals who come into the City Hall building. The next position, or the next initiative we have in there, is e-miscellaneous billing. Once again, not a large item, but what it will allow us is to do some billing for costs that aren't currently billed by the water department. Their system doesn't bill these because they're not tied to a water meter. So it leads to some efficiencies in the finance department. And lastly, online codification, which I think Rachel joked today that's going to get knocked off. And I said, Rachel, yeah, I said, not necessarily. I said, this is an opportunity to make sure that we highlight that the online codification isn't solely something that is going to bring in efficiencies. It will pretty much keep in flat what we do in the city, but what it does is it opens up the public side of what we do with online codification. So if you're a member of the public and you're looking to understand our city code, it makes it more easy to find, and it puts us on par with other cities of our size. We're really one of the last cities of our size that really haven't moved into this area, so we believe it's an important investment. So with that, I've just gone over 15 initiatives really quickly. Is there any further questions that anyone would have about those?
Anyone have questions?
And once again, just to mention, this would be in addition, these would be the ones who would be recommended to move forward with the funding with the reduction of the property tax rate to the 14.19 rate. We'd be able to fund these positions moving forward, and it would only be for the general fund. That's the other thing I just wanted to make sure to mention on this one. Next slide, Tara.
We have a question? I don't see it. Sorry. Who is it? Renee? Go ahead, Renee. Sorry, I somehow I didn't see the.
That's okay. I just, the way that Zach stated his, if anyone had any questions, made me think it was the end of the deck, but I see it's not, so I'll just wait until the end. Thank you, though.
There's about 35 slides, so almost halfway there.
No hurry, no hurry. I just, I don't want to ask about something that you're probably going to present on, so I'll wait and see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
This slide right here goes over the 21 initiatives and studies. And in the interest of time, I wasn't going to go over each of the individual studies. This was included in the budget memo that was set up to City Council beforehand, but it does have 3 different areas. The first light yellow area will show the projects for FY21 and studies that are complete currently. The next set shows the ones that are ongoing or expected to be completed or completed towards the end of the year, meaning the debt recovery cleanup, as well as the FEMA assistance grant will be moving into next year, just the scope of those projects. And then lastly, the housing inspection software that was in the budget for FY22. This is being budgeted for in the budget for FY21. This has been moved over to FY22 just due to time for staff, as given their workload currently, they have not had any additional time to work on any additional projects this year. So this would be an FY22 item. The third section is looking at the budgeted salary allowances of 2.5%. Next slide, Tara. This is a similar slide that was shown on City Council during the work session. I've readjusted the figures given the removal of the code enforcement officer and also looking at some of the salary increases as well. And just as a brief review of City Council, starting from the 19.6 million of the total salary and benefit expenditures, the first $256,000 are really associated with FY21 pay increases and staff realignments. So what that means is for almost all of our positions, with the exception of fire, we have budgeted mid-year increases in salaries. Some of the bargaining units will get I believe it's police as well as AFSCME will get half of their increase in July, the other half in April. All non-bargaining positions will get theirs on April 1st of the end of this fiscal year. So that means April 1st of 2021 will be in there. So a large portion of the budget for the following year is reproportioning those costs because we don't have the full costs in the budget already. We have to then bring those into the budget for the next year. The next line is a line which deals with any increases requested by staff, primarily for overtime and part-time dollars. So about 56,000 requested by staff in order to keep the alignment for their provision of services. And the next line is really the line we'll be talking about in this section is the impact of the 2.5% increase in or 2.5% salary increase in there for existing positions. I'll save some notes on that until a following slide. The next area is 6% increase in there for medical health plans, which is about 150,000. Next line is about $300,000 for new positions added. Just one of the things to note it, in some of the positions in the general fund, they're split funded. So they're not the full cost of the fund isn't borne by the general fund. It's actually split between road use, sanitary sewer, stormwater, and stormwater, sanitary sewer, road use, and forgetting my fourth one, but it'll come back to me. And then lastly is a realignment of engineering costs in FY22. About $184,000 of engineering salaries are being reallocated to road use, being that these positions also support the road use activities, but there's no direct allocation. On the funding side, just so remind City Council, we also have general fund dollars that are coming there through the property tax levy actually, that are helping offset those costs. So we're not just adding cost to the road use without putting revenue assigned to it as well. So this totals $798,000, which would be the increase to the general fund this next year. Next slide. So what does this look like? One of the questions asked during the budget discussion was, how much does these $224,000 look at each, say, 0.5% increment? Because that's usually what we present to City Council in half or full percentage increment. So going all the way down to the 0.5% increment, it'd be 45,000. And it just, what I did, just to let you know, is I took 224,000 divided by 2.5, which gives me the amount per increment. So that's how we get to that number. It's a little different when you get down to each position, and this is the reason why. Once again, for example, my position is non-bargaining. So any increase for myself would only be actually 6.25% in the budget this next year. Someone who's a police officer, for example, their budgeted at their increase would be 2.5% of their total position, plus all the impacts on their costs. Once again, because the bargaining, the majority of the bargaining contracts, which we're looking at right now, aren't finalized, but we're forecasting as if they're going to start, those increases are going to start on July 1st of 2021. Non-bargaining staff, we currently do the April 1st at the end of the year. So the cost differential is somewhat different for the positions. What that means is that for the increases, it's not as much on this year's budget. It has the same 1 year impact, meaning the ongoing costs are the same, but for the 1 year budget, it's actually a lesser impact than a true 2.5% of total costs across the organization. Does that make sense? Okay. And then I brought it up all the way to 3.5%. Once again, staff is recommending a 2.5% request or recommendation in the budget currently, and that's what we're putting before City Council today. Next slide, Tara. And here's one of the areas which was a great question to say, how does the current recommendation being put forth by city staff compare that to one of the most common indexes we look at for inflation, which is CPI, Consumer Price Index. In addition, I wanted to add kind of two other layers, which I think helps tell a fuller story, because these are broad macroeconomic measures that have a lot of things built into them. So it's hard to tie a one-to-one relationship. So I feel these three together help tell a little fuller story of wages and salaries. CPI, just as an overview, it's a basket of goods, and it looks at that same basket of goods at actually equal months, time periods, and that's why we have data points at each month. And this is the Midwest value, which I think was mentioned by Councilman Stannard at the previous budget work session, that the 1.3%, as he was noting the value from September, is what we've seen in the Midwest category. And he's exactly correct, because that's the figure in there for September. If you take the blue or the green line above that, it's the same value, but it takes out one thing. It takes out less food and energy. And it's one of the areas that economists look at, because it removes some of the volatility that you'll get monthly due to the volatility in food and energy prices, because these numbers are not standardized, meaning based upon time period they're in. So it will show somewhat of a higher increase month over month, once again, because it's removing the impact of that food and energy. So it's showing all other goods their inflationary values are higher than being included with food and energy in there. Lastly, the red line is a different measure. So it's not CPI, but it's actually the employment cost index. And this is put together by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Promise I won't get into it too deep, but what it does is it talks about wages themselves. So they do an estimate of actually a survey and try to understand how much have wages and benefits increased in different industries. So I pulled out the information. We don't have it as granular as the Midwest, unfortunately. They don't have the sample sizes, my understanding, to get to that level, and they don't collect it as often. So it's a quarterly measure, but it does have the information in there for state and local government, which is great because it does separate public from private. And then also I took another layering, which is public administration. So it takes out, for example, universities. They have different cost drivers, the number of enrollees they have, and there's other factors that play into their cost systems. And it also pulls out some of the other areas that don't pertain so much to us as a city. And interestingly, they've stayed pretty steady over the same time period we're looking at for about 2.5% and to 3%, starting in about, I think the first data point was March of 2019, all the way through September, or I should take it back one, all the way through July of 20. In July of 20, it actually decreased significantly for that measure because you don't see it, it's pretty steady previous to that to 2.2%. So this measure itself, once again, just looks at salaries. It doesn't look at benefits. Benefits is a data option. I just kept it out to, given that what we're talking about today. But it gives another data point to show how that metric of increases in the public sector have varied over this time period. The last piece in there I should make note of is those triangles. So those little, if you remember the game Defender a long time ago, don't shoot them out of the sky. Back in March of 2019, or actually be April 2019, this is the budgeted increase we had of 3.5% in the budget. And I'll, I think in the next slide I have, yeah, I'll explain a little bit of what the wage allowance concept means here at the city. But our wage allowance was 3.5% for a position, a non-bargaining position. In April of 2020, it was 2%. So it's below the red line. And we currently have it budgeted at 2.8% this April of 2021. Any questions? I just threw a lot of data. Sorry for the kind of mini.
Looks like Renee has a question.
Okay.
Yep, thanks, Nick. Zach, so you have the public administration, for government. Do you remember what the private sector was? I'd be curious to see how the private sector lined up here versus the public, especially since we're looking at all across the United States, not Midwest, which the blue and the green are specific to, but I would like to be able to compare if possible, or if you can remember where the private sector lines up in terms of wages and salaries for a comparison point. I think that's important.
Yeah, great question, Renee. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I didn't bring in the private sector information. I know looking at, one of the things I did look at briefly as I was looking at the difference between the private sector and the public sector benefit side, and there was quite a differential between the two of them, but I didn't look as closely on the salary side. But I could get that information once again. I could pull down the data set tomorrow and just send it out to City Council so they have that information.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate it. I have to say, after our Friday budget meeting a couple weeks ago, I've been contacted by multiple people who were happy that we were really going to hit the pause button and look at this, the salaries and the benefits, because so many people have lost their jobs or been negatively impacted. And so I'd be, just curious to see most of the tax base in the city of Marion are not city employees, obviously, and so they're contributing toward this. And I think that of all years, I feel like this really needs to, we need to be really careful here about what we're asking people to pay for. So the more data, the better. I would appreciate whatever you could send out, especially if you could get the red line number specific to the Midwest so that we're comparing apples to apples when we're looking at it against the green and blue lines, which are geographically targeted at the Midwest. So I'm not sure what you can do, but just thought I'd throw it all out there while you're looking. Anything you can do would be great. Thank you.
No, thank you, Renee. I don't think they have the regional data for this data set, but I'll double check on that. One of the other data points I just wanted to make note of, because I've been calling some of local jurisdictions, is in a similar mindset to understand how regionally are we positioned with this budgeted amount right now? Because I think one of the questions you're asking, Renee, too, is how much is appropriate given our sector, and that was one of the reasons I want to make sure to pull in the public sector, because this is public sector data, so it will average together the public sector comparators across the U.S. for the red line. But in talking to Hiawatha is planning right now, they're budgeting 2.5%. Lynn County is budgeting 2%. And last I talked to Cedar Rapids, I talked to them about a month ago, about 3%. So these are where our public sector, some of our regional comparators are looking at as they're taking their budgets to city council and having similar discussions on the salary increases for this next year. So it was one of the areas too, we wanted to make sure that we were in line with, once again, the overall sector. And I should mention too, similarly, Hiawatha had mentioned that one of the reasons they were continuing to look at this is to make sure that they were staying competitive with their wages. It's one of the things as they look in their salary comparisons, the reason why that they're making that recommendation for this next year. Next slide, Tara. So this term, wage increase allowance, it's kind of wordy, and when you try to fit things in little boxes and make it big enough for people to see, it's nice to change the wording sometimes. But one of the reasons why this is here, or we utilize this, is because we want to make sure that we explain how this is used in the city. So each year, as employees and I should mention it's kind of somewhat a two-tiered system, because our bargaining contracts will lay out the requirements for that bargaining contract. So those terms of the labor agreements and what needs to be met are determined in that negotiation. Non-bargaining staff, that's set forth by the policy set forth by the city. And the city policy is that for any increases that we have, the pay for performance increases, as they're called, the percentages we put into the budget set the ceiling amount that an employee can get. So we're not a standard step system, where in some cities they do, to say it's a cost of living adjustment, for example, 2.5%, everyone gets it if you stay employed at the city. What the requirement is we have a rating system based upon your performance plan for the year. And if you get the maximum amount of points for your performance for that year, then you would be allotted the 2.5%. But the expectation is not all staff would be getting 2.5%. There might be years where certain departments may get higher or lower, but once again, it sets up the ceiling. So I just wanted to make sure that was understood for the increases for staff members. So it's kind of a twofold impact. One, what it means is that for the when we're budgeting, we're going to have some savings in this. So it means that every employee, if, for example, myself, I get rated at 2%, then that other 0.5% on my 0.625% this next year would be absorbed, meaning that wouldn't hit the salary line, because that wouldn't be my increase. So that's one of the areas I just wanted to make sure to notate, that it sets the ceiling. It's not a guarantee for every employee that's gainfully employed with the city. On the bargaining contracts, my understanding, for the most part, if you remain employed with the city, the escalators they have in there are their standard step system. So they will increase the salary bands and the increases for the employees within that. So one of the things that we're mindful of as we're trying to set rates between non-bargaining and bargaining is to make sure that they're not too far out of line with each other, because over time, what it does is it creates a disincentive to go into a bargaining, or to get out of a bargaining unit, because the wages potentially are increasing faster, because you're getting, for example, if it's a negotiated 2.5% in police and fire, they're getting the 2.5% if you stay employed. An employee of City of Marion may get on average, say, a 2.2 or 2%. So they're not rising at the same rate. So over time, you have some compression issues with salary. So just wanted to mention, it's kind of a underlying piece of the salary band setting, but it's one of the things we're staying mindful of trying to keep the two in alignment, the non-bargaining as well as the bargaining rates together. Does that make sense? Okay. Couple other things I wanted to know. Oh, Mary, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Couple other things just wanted to note in here is also put it in perspective of what does that look like for the median salaried staff member, because that's the other piece of it as well, is to know contextually what are we talking about. So and once again, a median instead of average, what a median does is it looks at the middle point. So when I started getting to get data together for the 5-year annual forecast, I looked at that because that helped me do some projections on costs over time. So at looking at a median salary employee of 66,000, this would be at a recommended 2.5%. This would be change over year would be $1,650 per month, 138, or per paycheck $63. If we looked at the September, this is the September ECI of the 2.2%, it decreases slightly to 1,452. You do the math, you get to the same proportions there, $56 a paycheck. And CPI at a 1.3%, which was September's rate, it takes it to $858 additionally a year, or $33 a paycheck. So I just want to put in perspective for a staff member, that would be prior to taking out taxes, and also prior to any of the shared costs that go into also our proportional system, which is one of the I think the good cost sharings we have with our health plans is as our cost plans increase, we have a proportional cost share. So as we increase by 6%, then the increases also carry forward to employees as well. So with the I think it was 149,000 we're expected to take on the general fund this next year. Of that, a single plan would expect to pay $4 more a month. A family plan would expect to pay $11 more a month. So that is part of the increased cost for employees of retaining some of the medical benefits that the city provides this to employees here at the city. Any questions before I go to the next slide? Okay, next slide.
Danny?
So the proprietary funds revenue. This wanted to make sure we review. These are the really the 4 major proprietary funds. Sanitary sewer replacement is a subcomponent of sanitary sewer. But wanted to make sure too we review these again with City Council, because these are some of the areas where for 3 of them we were recommending rate increases. We pulled back the rate increase for 1 of them, and we wanted to discuss those as part of the total increase being proposed to fund the services in the city of Marion. Next slide. Sanitary sewer revenue. As previously mentioned, or as mentioned in the 22nd budget workshop, we're recommending a 7% increase on the variable rate, which would take it from $4.10 to $4.39 a household. We'll get to review the exact numbers of what that corresponds to on the average household, but give it a preview. It's about $1.95 more a month per household. We're still recommending that amount. We did get some good news that that the $1.7 million increase for this next year, that we currently have an increase in the budget, expecting that it was due to the timing of our 2 contracts aligning for the increased capacity and kind of the sunsetting of 1 contract and the starting of another. There was an overlap of 1 year. In talking with Cedar Rapids, they said we can delay the payment of the last year of the contract until next year, which balancing basically that 1 year difference, balancing that plus what our new agreement will be, it will basically take our sanitary sewer replacement rates and it will make it slightly cheaper this next year on an ongoing basis. I say that with asterisks there because they're proposing a brand new facility. So this out year contract doesn't take into account the giant, enormous facility that's being recommended for construction, which would increase our costs astronomically. But what it would do on a short-term basis is it would allow our rates to be somewhat even on a year-over-year basis. For the fund balance position, it still places us at about $200,000 unstructurally balanced, meaning we're getting in less revenue than expenditures this next year with a 7% increase. And that's the reason why we are recommending the 7% increase, the $1.95 per month increase on this fund. Next slide. Sanitary sewer replacement. Similarly, we were also recommending in this rate an increase. This is a service charge of $2 a month. That has been that rate for as long as we know. In looking at what the fund can support this next year, we're recommending delaying the increase of that rate and looking at that in FY23. It's not that we don't think that there will be a needed increase. We just think that it can be forgone this year, given the fund balance of the fund, in order to help smooth out some of the increases over time. But we do believe it will be a necessary increase going forward, being that we have a number of infrastructure projects related to sanitary sewer that if we do not increase the funding for this, we're going to be severely limited in moving forward with some of those projects. So this would save $1 a month. We've initially proposed it would start in January. And the numbers I showed, total numbers, I showed it kind of increasing every month. So this would save $1 a month if it were to go forward at that rate. Tara's looking to get me out of here. I like it. No, I'm just kidding, Tara. The next one though. You did go one too far. There you go. Solid waste revenue. On solid waste, similarly to sanitary sewer, we are recommending still that the 7% increase there to the $1.25 a month increase there. This would primarily keep rate with the necessary dollars for the improvements in solid waste, as well as defray some of the lost revenue that we're getting because of the recycling market and the increase in the tipping fees. So this unfortunately is an area too that we're concerned if we don't continue to increase fees with the necessary costs that we currently have, that we're going to get behind. Next slide. Stormwater management, we had previously recommended no increase in there. We are also still recommending that it stay at the current rate. This is also adding a position in there and also moving forward some projects. So this fund is one of our healthier funds with a new position in there over time that we'll need to look at rate increases. But currently it's supporting the ongoing costs. Next fund. And lastly, the urban utility revenue or urban forest utility fund, as we mentioned previously, even given the impact with the derecho, because of defraying some of the emerald ash borer dollars that were initially going to be proposed for this next year and those being repurposed, they're expected to be able to move forward in the reforestation efforts in the city. So given that there's no recommended increase at this time, they also did increase the fund significantly by 75 cents this last year. Next slide. So where does that take us overall? This is the, I apologize for the very tiny slide. And this is the amount that we had previously recommended in the recommended budget of the 14, at the property tax rate of 14,29856. I'm just highlighting that it's a, and this is not what we're recommending currently, but just showing the comparison of what's changed. Previously, it would be a 7.7% increase on the annual bill of the utility rates, taking into account the property tax as well. It would be a 5% increase overall, and this would be a total monthly bill increase of $6.26 a month. Next slide, Tara. With some of the changes, or the two primary changes in here being the reduction of the sanitary sewer replacement fee of keeping that flat rather than increasing from $2 to $3, keeping it flat at $2, as well as the new property tax rate, which would shave about $10 off for a $168,000 home. This would then decrease it about $1 a month or $22 a year. So it would be a 6.5% increase on the utility funds, and then a total increase, an annual increase of $4.1 or a total proposed increase of $93.10 on an average residential home. So wanted to kind of cycle back afterwards and really start working now through, that's the end of the formal presentation of new information, and really wanted to then move through each of the individual light items we'd be looking at for decision points to say, what are your thoughts about the increases being proposed or the changes being proposed to the fees as well as the property taxes? As well as, I have a slide in here as well as the salary increases. I guess before we move into the decision points, are there any questions by City Council under, I covered a lot of territory, and sorry, I try to speak quickly to not keep us here too long, so.
Any questions this time? Yes, Renee.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick one, and I don't know if you addressed or not, but I know that several of us brought up the language that we weren't too thrilled about the emergency tax levy and what it should be used for or shouldn't be used for, or rewording it such that it was clear that, you know, police, the MPD software expense, you know, was going to be in there or wasn't going to be in there. And we can move this to the back of your slide deck presentation if that makes sense, but I just wasn't sure it was covered, and I want to make sure that that is at some point tonight, since I'm not sure if it changed.
No, great question, Renee. And I went back and forth of how detailed to be to try to save a slide or two. But no, in the current proposal, it is a property tax decrease, and the reason why it's decreasing is the emergency levy is completely removed. So this would have no dollars being applied to the emergency levy. We would not be levying $1 towards it. And that's where the offsetting of the revenue for the school resource officer and the removal of the code enforcement position would allow us to still move forward the other initiatives and still be at the same position for the general fund overall.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for that. And then I appreciate the format that you showed some of the data in, because it was, you know, things that we requested. And I also appreciate the cuts that came back in this new revised budget. But one thing I didn't see was, you know, we had heard a lot about a bunch of different studies that were going to be done, and I wanted to see, and I didn't see most of them. The one slide you showed us showed studies that were already complete or ongoing, but it didn't have a list of the many proposed studies and the cost to those, because usually they're tens of thousands of dollars. And I thought there could be some savings there by deferring possibly. And I don't know if I missed something, but I didn't see, you know, I was writing down when we did that budget thing on Friday. Again, there's a waste management study, agenda management, recreation software, rental housing software, online codification, public safety, comp study, records management, payroll processing. I know a couple of those were addressed, but where are the rest of them? Are they all still living and breathing? We just don't see them in one, like a dashboard of sorts to see what we're spending and what we're studying in the proposed budget?
Yeah, great question, Renee. Tara, would you be able to return back to slide 9 if you could? So slide 9 here, this will show, and it's at the very bottom section. It has 3 studies in there, and these are the priority ranking as well as the included studies for this next year. The first one is the solid waste management study that you referenced a little bit ago. This is one of this is the an important one for us. In addition to looking at our solid waste management processes going forward and making sure we're right-sizing our organization and the approach for the future of the city of Marion, we want to be mindful of that and also move forward the sustainable infrastructure strategic alignment measure, because this also does have direct strategic alignment piece. This is also being funded directly out of the solid waste fund directly. So this is one of the studies. The other 2 in there are the master planning for the Tower Terrace and then the master planning for the Furno East. So these would be the 3 major studies that we have included in the FY22 budget. Amal, feel free to chime in if there's any additional studies that we may have missed in there, but that was one of the discussions we had after the meeting to make sure that we did move those forward to provide these. And the next slide we'll go over is the 21 studies to also to recap those. And I may have gone too quickly over that slide, so we can do that as well. And there's one more over, Tara, the other way. So these right here, the FY21 initiatives and studies, these would be, and I think you did mention some of these, Renee. These are some of the initiatives that we have ongoing in 21, and we wanted to make sure to clarify. I think it was a good question you asked, to where are we at with some of these studies. So reviewing them, the compensation and classification study, that has been complete. So the next step is really looking at the compensation system redesign. One of the gifts from our given to our new HR director as she moves forward in onboarding with the city, and also moving forward our compensation design for the city.
Hey, Zach.
Mhm.
I don't want, you actually did go through this plenty fine. My question was more about, I don't need you to justify each of these, because it looks like aside from the last one, we've already done these, we've paid for it. My question was, what can we possibly not pay for and defer? But, you know, I don't know how many are on here, 15, 14 of the 15 look like that ship has already sailed. So I was looking for the opportunities to
I see what you're saying.
put a pin in it. I don't need it. I appreciate you're willing to explain it. You know, like I said, the ship is already sailing in this case. And so, yeah, okay. I just, you know, it was in the proposed budget, you know, we talked about them. So I wasn't under the impression that most of it we already stroked the check for. So that was a little misleading, or I didn't understand it, but it doesn't seem like it's an ask if we've already paid, right? Or am I missing something?
Correct. In the majority of these studies, they have and initiatives and projects they're currently underway. Once again, the only one in there that is part of an initiative in 21, but building did not have capacity to get to it this year, is the housing inspection software. So this is being, they asked for it again in FY22. So this is the only one in this grouping that has not started yet, and will not start until FY22, given their capacity. And then I guess that question then relays in my mind back to the previous two slides, because Tara, if you can go back to 9 again. 9 gives a breakdown of the new initiatives. So if there was opportunities to make some decreases in the budget, these are the primary initiatives that we're looking to move forward. There's some additional dollars in the budget, which I didn't call it every dollar being increased or decreased, because some of them are increasing commodity lines and the costs to provide the current complement of services. But these would be the new initiatives that we would be looking to embark on for the city for this next year. So
okay,
in my mind,
I do appreciate the format of this slide, so thank you for that. The implications of deferring is very helpful. So obviously the 3 at the bottom, all being ranked high, those are very important. The other thing, the enhanced service delivery, that and the strategic plan alignment are critical in terms of being able to justify to the public what this budget is being spent on. It's to make their lives easier, or the vision that their elected officials in concert with staff have proposed. So I actually really appreciate this slide. Because I only saw those 3 studies, and then like I said, the other page, so I might have misunderstood something a couple weeks ago in terms of thinking that we could have some impact on possibly not approving some studies right away, but that's not the case. So I'm totally fine. I know you could go on for days about any of these line items, but I get them, and you did explain them well when you went through them previously. So no need to spend more time on 9 and 11 for me, unless anyone else has anything. So thanks.
Grant has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Zach and Amal, we had a bit of correspondence on specifically at the bottom of this page that's showing master planning for Tower Terrace as well as for Furnow East. And I think what I learned from this is that master planning can be funded via TIF with effectively no substantive impact on any of our levy rates or anything else that's going on. Is there anything else at least I should know just about those? I understand their relative importance, but is there anything else that's pertinent for our consideration on those?
I was going to defer to Amal if she has any notes she wants to discuss about those. She's more intimately informed about some of those master planning tools in the CIP. So, and oh, there she is.
Yes, those are for a planning standpoint, consider both critical plans, and we're looking at the opportunity for the city to be able to influence development. And this is our way of getting ahead of development and being ready, preparing for those developments, mainly because of their impact on our critical infrastructure. We're working on sewer study right now, and we're talking about capacity. Knowing what goes on those areas is really helpful for the city. And also we're looking at the opportunity of helping the tax base in the long run, if we have the opportunity to look at how those areas are planned and being able to influence that development. We did talk about both are going to be funded through tax increment financing. Actually, for now East, we're looking to, in that area, we're looking to maximize the commercial space to help with designating the urban renewal area in that side of the city, to help with supporting infrastructure improvement in the area. So in the long run, we're looking at both plans serving as economic development tools. The Tower Terrace area is also, we consider a critical growth area from a comprehensive plan standpoint. We consider those are infill development. So according to the comprehensive plan, those should be the primary growth area, great growth areas, and it should be city priority. So, and we know that the development is approaching, so we can get to having those studies or master planning done soon enough.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing I would just add a little bit to that. Sorry, Grant, but especially with that Tower Terrace area, that's anticipated to be a joint project between us and Cedar Rapids. And with that area having a line going up between both cities, being able to make sure that we're appropriately lining up streets, that we understand where our interconnection points are going to be for sanitary sewer and water system is absolutely critical. I think the staff has heard me use the nightmare scenario would be to have a road that goes up on the boundary between the two cities, where Cedar Rapids has half of it and then we have half of it, because the point at which at some time in the future when it needs to be reconstructed, one of us is going to want to do it and the other one's not going to want to do it, and it's going to create a lot of problems. So the earlier we can get ahead of that and just understand and make those decisions about where that infrastructure is going to be, the better.
So thank you for all of that. And if this was absolutely obvious to everybody else, I'm sorry for the bird walk on this. I will just say what I've learned from this is, and specific to these two efforts, we want to be in the power curve for setting expectations. Setting those expectations then informs our infrastructure planning and ultimately informs what the developers plan to do in those areas. So I appreciate I guess the forbearance that everybody has shown me on those particular items. I will just comment, I am extremely enthused for the solid waste management study, because I think that obviously that will inform our refined thinking going forward on that important topic. So thank you.
So then the next stage really is to move into the decision points that we have facing the city council. So I think that's about slide 25. So the first one here is the sanitary sewer revenue. To provide a little bit more context to what Zach was talking about, our contract with Cedar Rapids provides for 2 different capacity charges. When they first approached us about a new agreement, we were looking at a population buying capacity in the plant, what they'd call our catch-up capacity for a community of 45,000 people. So there's one charge that we're paying for that, and we've been paying that on the contract now. There's another one for a next incremental piece that will take us from 45 to 48,000. That's an additional monthly charge. And when we first lined those up, the intent was one would stop and then the other one would start. Well, the contract specified that they would start immediately upon the adoption of the new contract, and it got tied up with legal with our neighbor to the southwest for a while and ended up being adopted late. And we did not catch that that also backed up the first series of charges to where we have a fiscal year where they overlapped. And so Cedar Rapids has agreed in working with us to back up that second series of charges so that we don't have a fiscal year where they overlap. So that's going to save us about $90,000 a month for the coming fiscal year. And then, as Zach alluded to, the first charge that's going to drop off is about $116,000 a month. The new charge that's going to replace it will be about $112,000 a month. So it will save us a little bit over the course of the fiscal year, but the big thing was eliminating the overlap. However, we still need to make an adjustment to the monthly rates to ensure that we're not continuing to tap against the fund balance for sanitary sewer. Even with the amount that we have proposed, we are still anticipating that we're going to have a decline, but we do need to get our connection fees moving forward so that we can start doing those towards the middle of the fiscal year. And between the two of those, we would expect to have about a $200,000 structural deficit in the fund, and then continue to make sure that we're in alignment with the 5-year financial plan as future rate increases are proposed. We have the next year to continue to work with Cedar Rapids on how the shares for allocations for their wastewater treatment plant improvements are going to be apportioned out. They're planning about $500 million worth of improvements to the facility. Not that they're unnecessary, that they could be considered unnecessary. It's just the facility is essentially about at the end of life, and it needs to be upgraded to meet new standards and just needs a lot of work to ensure that it's got useful life going forward. So there will be more to come on that. So this is really the first decision point for the council on proceeding forward with that 7% increase on the variable charge. So questions, strongly held opinions?
Any questions?
This is one of those areas where I'm just going to make a leap and assume that silence equals assent. Because this group has historically never been shy about telling me things you don't like, so. And then sanitary sewer replacement revenue, we did take that out for the proposed mid-year change to the budget. I would note though that there will be a proposal for that to start with the following fiscal year budget. In essence, we're backing it up by 6 months. We know that we're going to need to make adjustments to that for needed upgrades and maintenance on our own internal collection system. And this is a primary source of funding that we would use for that. And so we want to make sure that we are planning for it to make sure that as those projects come forward in the CIP that we are appropriately planning for it. I know it sounds like a lot, but keep in mind that that $1 a month brings in somewhere about $120,000. And in the grand scheme of things on sanitary sewer, when you're contemplating millions of dollars of improvements, that does not account for a lot that you can do with cash. So no change proposed there. So the next one then is solid waste revenue. We're proposing a 7% increase in the solid waste side. big drivers for this one. We are in a different world where it comes to recycling. Recycling used to cost $20 a ton. Now it's $90 a ton and continuing to go up. In addition, we're anticipating the loss of the community credits that were provided by the Solid Waste Agency, which was either booked as revenue of about $66,000, or it could be used as an offset of expenses for $66,000. So between the two of those and increased costs of operation, the Public Services Commission has recommended an increase of 7%. Then the big one, property taxes. And if we could, Terrell, could you advance forward 2 slides? I wanted to just highlight something before we get into this. This is a telling slide because I think one of the things I wanted to draw out about this that we haven't talked about in our narrative is you can see in 2018 that there was a spike in the amount that the city was asking for per $100,000 of valuation. I think it's worth noting that 2017 was the year that the property tax legislation went into effect. And so this was not a case where the city was attempting to, or that we approved some type of a large property tax increase on the residential side. What it actually was, is it was a shift with the loss of 10% of commercial and industrial across the board. So just using round numbers, if the city was levying 25 million in 2017 and 25 million in 2018, but one big classification of property suddenly lost a bunch of value, that was picked up by the other classifications of property. So most of what you're seeing there was actually a shift caused by the changes in the property tax law, not something that the city of Marion undertook. So I just wanted to kind of point that out to help provide some context. Okay. So the property tax rate as it was initially proposed, as the council's aware, was 14.29. With the revisions that we've put in there now, we're sitting at 14.19976. The total amount throughout the course of the year that an average household would pay would come out to about $93.10 over what we were asking for this year. I would point out that on the $30 that shows on property taxes, I believe if you were talking about just the change on this property due to the change in the residential rollback, it would be about $32. So whereas before the budget was based around the rollback impact plus a little bit, here we're actually blunting the impact of the rollback, the change in valuation on the property year over year. And then this is the allowance we have in here for the salary increases across the organization. I know that there's been a lot of discussion with the city about this. One of the things I wanted to just draw your attention to is that I think Zach talked a little bit about the need to make sure that we're maintaining some separation between the bargaining and the non-bargaining wages. One of the things I think that gets lost in that conversation is just simply the structure of the union contracts themselves, because not only do you have, when you talk about an across-the-board adjustment to those contracts, you're actually making an across-the-board adjustment to the pay steps contained within the contract. So for example, if you hit a period in your tenure with the city, say that you've been here 5 years and you jump into the next step, you're getting a step plus the benefit of the adjustment to that step. So when we talk in terms of 2.5%, the ultimate impact to the bargaining employees typically is more than that. And so I know that council had some concerns about the way that the city's compensation systems had been set up in the past, but it was really intended to make sure that there was equity across the organization, because when you step out of the bargaining units, your only pay increase other than a promotion is based off of the adjustments you get per year. There are no steps. There's not a series of steps that people go through outside of where they are initially placed in the scale. Everything after that is based off of the pay for performance increases year over year. So we've got it included in there at 2.5%. The other thing I would say is I know that City Council did receive an email from a citizen, and it raised an issue about what did people do to earn raises over the course of the year. From my perspective, in a year where they've had to deal with COVID and derecho, I don't have a question what they did to earn it. I know what they did to earn it, and I know how long it took them and what they put of themselves into the community to earn that. So, I know that there's always an interest in wanting to make sure that we keep a sharp eye on this to make sure that we're not overcompensating. But I think this is a fair one. And to Zach's earlier point, just because it's in the budget at 2.5% does not mean that it's an automatic 2.5%. There's still an evaluation process that people have to go through before those are awarded. Okay. So Zach, did you want to cover calendar?
Yep. So in 2 weeks, we have slated to come back to City Council with the tentative budget. And that's where we're looking to make sure that City Council is in alignment with some of the changes that we've made to this called somewhat a proposed changes to the recommended budget, so that we bring you once again a budget with a little bit more detail than we've given in the last year. So our next steps would be to make sure that we provide the detail on this, and then it would be then after that point on the 16th is we'd be looking 2 days later would be the public hearing on maximum property taxes. Just to let City Council know, did provide, given the direction at the budget work session, I did send the information to the Marion Times. So they're publishing this Friday, that max property tax basically ceiling for us that allows us capacity to set our rate to. But as indicated in this presentation today, we're looking to move forward with the rate of the decrease of 14.19% of decrease in comparison to last year. And then we'd be coming a month later to City Council for budget adoption on March 16th. And 2 days later, I should say, is the public hearing. We kind of come to City Council beforehand in the work session to make sure we can get through any necessary questions and then move forward with the adoption. So with that, wanted to see if there's any other questions or aspects that we'd need to consider in the tentative budget. If not, we'd be moving everything into the tentative scenario and making sure everything is packaged appropriately for that presentation on the 16th in 2 weeks.
And a critical piece to remember is that while we already put the hearing notice out for the hearing on the maximum property taxes, the next one is the one that sets all your maximums. The hearing notice that goes in for the final budget approval, whatever we put in there for property tax number cannot be raised. Revenues, expenditures, you can't raise expenditures, you can't raise tax rates after the hearing notice is published. Council can always, after the public hearing, choose to make adjustments that reduce any of those, but cannot increase those.
Okay, questions, go ahead, Will.
Not necessarily a question, but more of a comment. As much as I don't like the fees being raised, unfortunately, it seems to be a necessity because the costs to do that stuff has gone up. So I think the adjustments that have been made since the budget meeting are good, and I'm in favor of moving forward with where we're at right now.
Go ahead.
I too am comfortable with where we are. This has been a really tough year for everybody, right? Us as a city and our residents. And you all worked hard to bring back a budget that I think we feel real good about, by both compensating our employees for the good hard work that you've done, but at the same time recognizing that our residents are struggling too, right? So how can we kind of help them out and still pay the bills? So I feel good about this, and I appreciate the hard work that has went into this budget.
Grant, go ahead.
Thank you. I agree. I appreciate the work and the additional effort that everybody went to in order to bring back a refined budget. It went in general the right way, as I think the sentiment is. It's responsive to the concerns that I think we collectively brought forward. So I'm based on what I've seen today, and I just am at a pretty satisfying resting point with this. So thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Renee.
Thank you. Yeah, just to be heard, I just want to echo what the three councilmen before me said. I think, I appreciate the extra effort of you guys having to, this was not on the radar for tonight's agenda, but based on a lot of questions and discussion on our all-day Friday meeting, this came out of it, as well as some additional revisions and cuts. And so I too appreciate that. I think that this is a fair budget that I feel comfortable standing behind and defending or explaining to the public as we move it down the timeline. So thank you, everybody, for your efforts involved.
Okay, anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I also am in support of the budget as it's been presented. Again, it does recognize to me that the staff has been listening to the requests and comments of the city council. Appropriate changes have been made. And as I talked about a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that, number one, our budgeting process has really been improving over the last couple of years. I think we're starting to saw a very good alignment this year. I think the best alignment of our budget with our strategic plan. So I think those are getting in sync and making sure that what we feel are the biggest objectives that we have for a city to continue to provide services and throughout the city on an economical basis, I think is represented in this budget. So I'm in complete support of the budget as presented.
Okay, anyone else? I too want to say thank you. This is not an easy process. It's I know it's very difficult and a lot of difficult decisions, trying to figure out where to cut and what how to make things work. So we appreciate all your time and all the staff who have had input into this. And I think we've reached a point where any increases are easily explainable, they're justified. It's just a difficult process, and trying to keep the city operating, keep us moving forward while looking out for the best interests of the residents. I think you've done a good job with this, and we appreciate it very much.
Mayor, if I could, I'd really like to call out Zach and Amal and Brian and Leanne for the preparation of this one, because we didn't talk about it much here as we did during the regular budget session, but this also accommodates the first allocations towards paying the local share of the derecho. Otherwise, this could have potentially looked different when it was initially presented to the city council. And I think it's important, just as a point of reference for you all, we have about 1,800 utility accounts across the city of Marion. The impact of the derecho locally is about $400 per account. So I think it's absolutely remarkable that with their diligence and work, we've been able to put a budget together that still contemplates tax reduction while taking care of the first piece of the worst natural disaster that we've ever seen.
Thanks for bringing that up, Lon. And again, we know this is a team effort. This takes everyone, and we appreciate everyone's time and diligence. And I agree with what Steve said. I just feel like year after year, in my 7-8 years here, I just see us getting better and better at this. Through this, the process is just getting so much better that we can make informed decisions and feel confident in the decisions that we're making. So thank you so much to everyone. Anything else?
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone have anything else to add before we adjourn? Okay, thank you. The meeting is adjourned. We'll see you on
Thanks all.
Thursday.